All right, Mr. Best, I've got 7:30. Shall we get going?
Welcome to the November 25th Arlington County Transportation Commission. Staff would like to introduce a new Transportation Commission member, Mr. Darren Buck. Welcome.
Welcome, Mr. Buck.
Item 1 is citizen comment on matters not on the agenda, and we do have one speaker. County Board Member Eric Gutshaw is here this evening.
I get 2 minutes.
I think you get 5. But
I think you're representing an organization, so you know 5.
Is this on? Is this on? It seems like what everybody does at this table. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks. This is the first time I've sat in this seat. It's kind of weird. I just wanted to, on behalf of the board, is to thank everyone for your service. Transportation is really, to me, very key to everything that we're doing here in the county. I remember it was probably about 15 years ago, my cousin, who was studying getting his master's in urban and regional planning at Kent State University, showed me his textbook. And one of the, a section of a chapter, not the whole chapter, but a section of the chapter, had to do with smart growth and in particular transit-oriented development. That was the section. And it was, the whole thing was about the RB corridor and the success of what Arlington, this place in Virginia, had done with transit-oriented development. And that was actually when I had already started to get involved at that time through my civic association, but that was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Arlington's a special place. And it was sort of proof that we were leading the way, and a case study literally wrote the book, in this case, on how to do transit-oriented development. So now you fast forward, and here we are, it's almost 2020. We can, everything, all of the problems that we are trying to solve, almost one way or another, really come back to transportation anyway, in particular housing. Davis and I were just having this conversation about that housing. Some folks might say, oh, well, if it's not affordable in Arlington, then you should just go live further out where it gets more affordable. Well, of course, the trick to that is you got to be able to move people. If you live farther away, you have higher transportation costs. That has other negative effects. And so if we want Arlington to really continue to be the great place that I think we all have fallen in love with and that we're all very proud to serve in, and that we're going to be to keep Arlington as awesome as it is for us, for future generations, it comes back to that we truly need a Mac Daddy transportation network of all kinds of modes. And I know all of you have your individual passions, and then collectively, we have a great passion for making sure that we get transportation right. It is one of the elements that is the most difficult to try to fix later. So you have to get it right the first time around. And even as we say that, it's something, though, that does continue to evolve through time. So we have lots of opportunities. So on behalf of the board, thank you for the work and the role that you play in doing that. And I'm really here just to answer any questions. I could go on and on and on about all different kinds of subjects, but I thought I would let you guys ask the questions.
Great. Anybody, Commissioner Lantelmi, you want to lead off? Oh, sorry. That looked like you were raising a hand.
Looked like a hand raise. Who is, besides you, Chris, who's the most senior on the commission? Is it Richard? Are you the most senior?
I think it might be Commissioner Price, yeah.
Okay, I think you should ask a question then, Commissioner Price.
Thank you for your hard work on behalf of the Arlington residents. We appreciate you on the council. And I don't have any questions. Just keep up the good work. Thank you.
Well, then we could go to the most junior, Darren. Commissioner Buck. The buck stops here.
All right, so the new Commissioner hazing begins. So you kind of alluded to the transportation role in creating a quality community. Could you talk a little bit more about our method of planning and our use of the level of service standard and how transportation has a distinct feedback loop to land use and trying to create affordability in housing?
Well, you're just diving straight into the weeds there, right? I mean, so I would say, to me, the interrelationship between planning and planning of sort of urban planning, if you will, land use planning and transportation planning is that you can't, planning generally involves in Arlington almost always involves adding density. And we know that we cannot add more people and add more cars. We've got to figure out how we're going to have more people, whether that's people who are working during the daytime in office or living here and sleeping here in the evening in their homes. In order to add more people, we have to do that in ways that allows people to move around that is not dependent on their own car. So that gets into the need to have transit-oriented development. And we are in a period right now, I believe, where we've played out, not completely, I think the figures are roughly that the metro corridors are roughly 85% built out. Don't quote me on those numbers. But we've played out in large part over the last 50 years transit-oriented development, mostly meaning metro-oriented development. Now, we added the ART system. We have metro buses that are feeders into the metro system, but it's largely been about metro. The costs of adding more metro make it unlikely that that's going to happen. And I'm not even so sure when you look at the densities that have been required in order to justify the type of expense for underground metro. I'm not even sure that even if it wasn't pure cost, if that's really where we wanted to head. So what that means is we need a lot more of different kinds of transit. We need a bus system that is not just for those people who can't afford to own a car. We need a bus system that is actually a quality system that is the kind of system that you can rely on so that people plan their lives around it. We need other modes. Like we just adopted our new ordinance regulating mobility devices, e-scooters and e-bikes and other things, because those serve a first mile, last mile. I think that we're evolving to some version of, if you think about the yellow cabs all over New York City, I think Arlington could be one day the kind of place where we have autonomous shuttles that are a version of that, where they're hail for service and some mix of Uber meets autonomous vehicle. But in order to get there, it takes planning to do that, and it takes making sure that collectively as a community that we don't expect our developers to invest in very expensive underground parking that we're probably not going to need, that instead we expect our developers to invest in the transportation infrastructure that we will need. Because like I said, for me, transportation is something that is much harder to fix after the fact and a whole lot easier, and you get a lot farther faster when you do it right the first time.
Commissioner Land, tell me now, is that
This time I
actually
really
a
do have
hand?
a question. Following up on that, yes, you're right. Land use is a key. We have invested billions of dollars in our fixed rail system. Metro has been the reason this county has been growing again. It is growing, and as you mentioned, the corridors are getting close to being built out. That shouldn't be the cap. Because we've already sunk huge amounts of money in the system and want to keep it that way, we have probably the opportunity to start looking at the zoning in these areas, going out quarter mile, half mile from these stations, looking at that zoning and seeing where we can start adding additional density that is consistent with what we have. We can have taller buildings, larger buildings within that quarter mile. We can have, where we have single-family residential neighborhoods, allowing accessory units, but even beyond that, allowing, other cities like Minneapolis, Portland are moving very rapidly toward allowing additional units within the context of their single-family neighborhoods, within those same envelopes. We have houses that are 5,000, 6,000 square feet. We could literally fit 4 large apartments in that same envelope. And if you have that within quarter mile, half mile of a metro system, we're taking advantage of what we've already invested, and it's cheap. And it doesn't do violence to the look, feel of these neighborhoods, especially given that people have fewer cars. That's always the initial objection, there's going to be too much traffic. Well, that's not happening here. Our vehicle miles traveled are staying remarkably stable. I think that we could safely start experimenting with rezoning within quarter mile, half mile of our metro stations.
Do you think it's that opportunity exists only within quarter mile of a metro station, or is it possible
No, I think
that
Columbia Pike would be another one where once we get the true enhanced bus system going, how that plays out, that could end up supporting something similar. If we have a true dedicated bus lanes or express bus lanes, express, I don't mean fewer stops, I mean that they can go through more rapidly as opposed to being stuck in traffic, that'd be a real incentive for people to live and take that bus. As you were saying, we would like to have we should have some sort of enhanced bus service that is seen as a premium service, even if the fare isn't a
which came
premium
first,
fare.
the chicken or the egg?
I think, well, look, we've already committed to putting in a bus service along Columbia Pike. If people are attracted to that, the way we hope and expect they will be, I think that could lay the foundation for allowing additional density along the pike.
I think I see your vision. I think that the conversation that we have to have as a community, and I think this is actually going to be true on the Lee Highway corridor as well, with the planned Lee Highway effort that's underway, is figuring out, and frankly, I think we lost our way for a little bit with our bus service, in that we didn't disinvest, but the level of investment has not kept up with, I think, what expectations were, and in particular with the cancellation of the streetcar and the prospect for converting what the plans for the streetcar were to an enhanced bus service. I'm hopeful that we're going to see that now with the super stops actually being built and all of the other improvements, that we're going to get our legs back underneath us again. But what I'm getting at is, in terms of density and the opportunity for density that is then dependent on transit, there is the chicken egg syndrome, right? Where if you don't have the density to support the ridership, then can you invest in the transit? And if you invest in the transit, then you need to make sure that you've got the density there. So I think that we have to figure out, we have to be willing to be bold in the same way that we were with Metro, where we made a huge investment in Arlington on our own, kicked in dollars to bring the Metro into our commercial corridor and to underground it, as most of us here know, instead of the feds just wanted to put it in the median of 66. And that was it wasn't, I don't want to call it a leap of faith, because I think there was a lot of evidence to support it, but it was a form of a leap of faith because there weren't a lot of communities that had done it, and certainly not in America. And so it gets back to why I think we ended up being, a chapter in a textbook.
Yeah, it was an amazingly forward-looking decision 50 years ago. At that time, there was disinvestment in subway systems. They were being torn down rather than being built. So what we did was amazing, but we can't rest on our laurels. That was a decision 50 years ago. It's reached virtually full fruition. We now have to look, what's the next step? What's 2.0? We've done 1.0. What's 2.0?
Exactly.
Anybody else have a question for Mr. Gutschall? Commissioner Calkins?
So doubling down a little bit on that bus emphasis, We've got a couple of examples regionally where cities, specifically the district, have taken some of their larger roadways and decided to take a vehicle lane in each direction and paint it red and say it's for buses only. I think we do, and the Pike's a hard one, but I think we have the ridership along that corridor already. It's one of Metro Bus's heaviest traveled corridors. I think we're at a point where I would say we have the ridership, and if we create an even better service and double down with land use changes, that we have the opportunity to create real opportunity along that corridor. And then my second comment is also almost a pivot off of yours. And I think we need to rethink the RB corridor in its entirety and really think beyond that 1.5 mile. I live in Ballston. I live in a 10-story building 2 blocks from the Metro. I think it could have been a 20-story building. It was built in the 80s, so I understand that. But I think that we really need to think, especially, I think Ballston's the oldest sector plan, Virginia Square maybe after that, but reopening both of those because there's a lot of older apartment buildings that are probably naturally occurring affordable housing, but that will be redeveloped in the next 15 to 20 years because of just market pressure, that if we don't have a more ambitious sector plan that adds density to those sites and speaks to how we want inclusive development to happen, we're really going to miss an opportunity again to see that. So those are my 2 comments, also building off of yours. But I think they both have a really important nexus between the land use and housing affordability issues that Arlington and the region are facing, as well as our ability to double down on our heavy investment in transportation and transit that we've already made in Arlington and make a good marriage between the 2.
Sure. Thank you.
Anybody else?
All righty. Well,
Thanks for
thanks
coming
for the
out.
opportunity. And again, thanks to everyone for the work that you do. And don't ever hesitate to reach out to me at any time. Be happy to chat with you about anything. All right. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Our next item is item 2. This is the Crystal Houses site plan. This is a site plan action, and we also have 5 speakers to this item. So I'll turn it over to the applicant.
Well, good evening, everyone. Nicholas Cummings here with Walsh Colucci on behalf of the applicant. I'm just going to give some brief background and a little bit of exciting news with some updates on this project before Wells & Associates goes into some of the more transportation-focused details. First, the background. The project is a new site plan for the Crystal Houses block. It includes a rezoning to the COCC zoning district and development in accordance with the Crystal City sector plan. There are 828 units in the existing 12-story 1960s era buildings on the block. We propose adding 6 new buildings of various sizes as infill development. They include Crystal House 3, which is 11 stories and 432 units. I'm glad we're putting up the image here. This always helps, and maybe I can describe for you just afterwards where everything is. Crystal House 4, which is 11 stories and 222 units. Crystal House 5, which is the parking lot site closest to you in this image, which is 7 stories and 81 units. And to back up, Crystal House 3 is the larger building in the background, and Crystal House 4 is the larger building a little bit closer to you there. Crystal House 6, which is actually hiding behind Crystal House 1 there, it's a 5-story, 63-unit building just along 15th Street up there. And then Crystal Houses 7 and 8, which are townhome-style multifamily units. We're proposing 21 of those along Fern Street in 2 sticks of units, and you can just see Crystal House 7 right there in between Crystal Houses 1 and 2 in this 3D image. Those are 2 stories each. Counting the existing units, the total number of residential units on the block will be 1,647. This is the addition of 819 new residential units. All the proposed development generally conforms with the height and massing recommendations of the sector plan, and the buildings are located where the sector plan envisioned new development. Really, this plan very closely mirrors the concept plan and the sector plan, if almost exactly. There have been 3 major changes since we last presented. Some of them you've heard about in SPRC, and one you have not. We removed substantial amounts of surface parking. Today, there are 601 surface parking spaces on the site. Over the summer, we presented a plan to the SPRC that included 140 parking spaces. We recently reduced it to 98 surface parking spaces, and very recently, as of the end of last week, which is reflected in part in the draft staff report, we renewed our efforts and reduced surface parking spaces to 62 spaces. of which 22 are grasscrete. Those grasscrete spaces are closer to the open spaces, and we have a schematic exhibit that will identify for you where those all are that Wells has included in their presentation. We also added protected bike lanes, which you've heard about along our frontage on Eads Street, but we are also, as an element of the community benefits package to earn the additional density on this site, adding the bike lanes, the protected bike lanes on the block just to the north, which with the Met Park office project will complete that link between 23rd Street all the way up Eads Street. So we have also engaged with the 23rd Street businesses to address their concerns. That's been a big part of the engagement over the last few weeks. The current plans include 13 surface parking spaces and 23 below-grade spaces to serve them. But more importantly, we have reached agreement with the county to deed the CH5 parcel to Arlington County in lieu of providing on-site affordable units. This would occur after board approval of the project, so the county would receive a parcel with an approved site plan development on it. The county intends to, as staff can elaborate on, develop it as affordable housing and public parking. So that was a major move here, and while I'm aware of some developers having sold parcels to the county before, I don't think a creative solution like this to some of the things that have been brought up throughout SPRC and recently has ever been done before, at least in my more recent memory. So we're very excited about that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Wells & Associates, and they can get into some more of the details for you tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm John Schick from Wells & Associates. We presented this back a few months ago as an info item, so tonight I was really just going to focus on a lot of the updates for you all, and I can certainly go back and describe anything in more detail. I have all the backup slides from last time, should there be any questions. So with that, once again, I think everyone's familiar with the site. The site's located just west of the Crystal City Metro, south of 18th, north of 22nd, and then bounded by Fern to the west and Eads Street to the east. So now I just want to walk through a little bit of a progression of kind of how the site plan has evolved. So shown on the screen right now is the existing site plan. Today there's 828 dwelling units, and then surface parking, the 593 and the 8, so that accounts for about 79% of the parking today being on the surface, then 164 spaces being in the garage. The parking ratio today is at about a 0.92. So then our site plan filed back in March, went forward and added the new buildings. And with that site plan, we decreased the surface parking to about 23%. So as you can see, we have the numbers listed there for both the head-in and the parallel spaces. And overall, our parking ratio at that point was at a 0.76. So most recently, with the current site plan, again, as Nick said, we're at 1,647 dwelling units in total, with the surface head-in parking being 19, the parallel being 79, and then 1092 with an overall ratio of 0.72. This most recent plan added Crystal houses 7 and 8 as well. And then, as Nick had mentioned, even more recent than that, after discussions with the county, we have further reduced the parking ratio, which is shown on the screen now. It shows the 62 surface spaces. Those I actually shouldn't say head-in; they're parallel spaces, majority of them. And then kind of hatched up around the top in Crystal House 1, and then on the top side of Crystal House 2, and on the plan right of Crystal House 2 shows where Nick had, as Nick had mentioned, some of the surface parking being the grasscrete that we'll be able to provide where the parallel spaces are. And that accounts for about 22 spaces, or about a third of the total surface spaces. But as you can see in the numbers there, we're now providing about only 2% of our parking now is surface, whereas the rest is in a garage, and we're at a 0.69 overall parking ratio. Just a quick walk around the site again. Another big development has been working with DES staff on Eads Street. So this shows the current condition today on Eads and then the proposed condition, with the big change being the alteration to the bike lane along our frontage. A 6-foot separated bike lane will be provided along the frontage that will be slightly raised above the road. And then a 7-foot landscape buffer will now exist between the bike lane and the parking lane. versus today it being an on-street facility. Over on Fern Street, here the big upgrade is really along our frontage. We're improving, we're adding a 6-foot sidewalk with a 6-foot landscaping buffer. Keep going. On 18th Street, again, the big improvement here being along the frontages with improved sidewalk and landscape buffers. And then the same thing on 22nd Street, taking it from, the 4-foot landscape buffer and missing some portions of sidewalk to a 6-foot sidewalk, along with a 6-foot planted buffer. Again, I hit on this with the info item, but I'll just quickly run through it. Our traffic study looked at 11 study intersections. The study was scoped with Arlington County and found that all the intersections operated at acceptable levels of service today. Max pedestrians were reserved at 8 Eads and 18th Street. So with the proposed development, it was assumed a build out of 2026 was used in the study. We also had the 5 pipeline developments as shown there, along with a 0.5% growth rate. And then the future conditions with development, all the study intersections would continue to operate at acceptable levels of service. And then we also noted the removal of the median along 18th Street that would permit full access to our driveway up there. And that's a county project. So with that, that's my update, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
That was loud. I wanted to clarify really quickly that all of the remaining surface parking is parallel. None of it is head-in. It's all parallel along the internal streets. So, yeah, that was an important element of what we did.
Hi, I'm Jane Kim with DES Development Services. This is the staff presentation. I'm going to skip some of the slides that were duplicates of the applicant's presentation, but just to give you an overview, this is a rezoning, a site plan amendment, and a new site plan. I think we talked about the number of units and the parking. So the 0.72 is reflective of Crystal Houses being included in the site plan. Their 0.69 excludes Crystal Houses, but the project itself will be approved with Crystal Houses 5 so that when it's conveyed to the county, it will be entitled for development. So some more parking information, including the residential bicycle parking that's located in the garages, and then the 23 visitor parking spaces on the surface of the site throughout where the new buildings are located. Just a little bit of sector plan overview. The sector plan does not permit surface parking, and so even though the applicant has worked very hard in getting it down to that 62 number, that's still a modification that is being requested. We looked at that one. Some more images of Crystal Houses 5 if you're interested. And then I just wanted to touch upon a future parking study that the county intends to conduct post-approval. So we'll be evaluating the number of public parking resources that are needed for the 23rd Street retail area and to support that area as well as kind of the development in this near site vicinity. The images on this slide are actually from a parking study that was done over the spring. So a future study would kind of increase the area that's being looked at. We want to look at the curb space management, occupancy data, inventory for off-street parking as well, and the occupancy of that. And then look at the retail mode split analysis of the restaurants and retail establishments along the 23rd Street restaurant row corridor. So this, we heard a lot of parking concerns during the SPRC process, and we want to make sure that we are right-sizing the parking for the retail. We want to make sure that we can meet the needs of the retail establishments and encourage that local business, as well as provide for the public that may want to come to this area of the county. think we went over these numbers. Am I going backwards? So this is the bicycle infrastructure and other capital projects contextual map showing kind of what's going on in the greater Southeast area. So as you know, Crystal Houses will be building the protected bike lane on the southbound side along its project frontage as well as the block to the north. The green projects are all current capital projects or projects that will be coming, including the 18th Street project, which will remove the median as well as improve the intersections at Fern, I believe, and work with the applicant on the Eads intersection. And then pink is Met Park, which I think you'll hear from in a little bit. I don't know what's going on. So we wanted to point out that the South Eads Street cycle track will be a street level cycle track, not at sidewalk level. And that will be consistent for the entire Southeast Street corridor. While the median space will be treated differently, perhaps block to block, the cycle track itself will provide a continuous route. So for Crystal Houses, their street trees are actually in that median, which is much wider than, for instance, you'll hear for Met Park. And then the block between Crystal Houses and Met Park will likely just be a landscaped median that we're kind of putting in within the existing right-of-way. Right. Some of the other transportation infrastructure improvements we're providing with Crystal Houses are floating bus islands. These are a rather new infrastructure item in the county. You can see that the green highlight along the Crystal Houses frontage is where a bicyclist would go. And then the blue is just the average pedestrian. And then the orange highlight is where a pedestrian would wait for a transit bus. And so we're showing the separation of the modes, providing refuge places, as well as trying to encourage people to stay in their lane, literally, so that we can avoid conflicts. Same thing here with the blue for the pedestrians, green refuges for bicyclists. You can see at the intersection, if they're waiting to cross, they're waiting in different areas so as to avoid conflict points. These details for Crystal Houses specifically will be fine-tuned during the civil engineering process. There's obviously a lot of grading and drainage concerns that we will need to be looking at. Also, the handicap ramps and the different styles of ramps that we'll be using are going to be important. These are intersection improvements we hope to see kind of throughout the county as new development occurs. And so we're really working hard and working together to get the details right. And then finally, there's actually a proposed pedestrian access easement that connects the public park in the middle of the site in green to Fern Street without having a person walk on either 18th or 22nd. And that easement is a part of the project and is called for in the sector plan. And then these are the recommendations for the proposed actions from staff. And that's it.
Thank you very much. I think we're ready to hear from our speakers.
We have 5 speakers this evening. The first speaker is Freddie Lutz.
Hi there. I'm Freddie Lutz. I own Freddie's Beach Bar. We are the only gay but straight-friendly bar in Northern Virginia. And I also have Ristorante Federico 8 doors down. I've been on the street for 43 years. They didn't have all those child labor laws back in that day. Lunchtime business is not what it used to be. 40 years ago, we would have had 5 waiters on the floor on a Friday lunch at the former Cafe Italia. Now we have, we also would have a bartender and a host. We now have 1 waiter on a Friday lunch, and he is also the bartender and the host, and he's not busy. Parking was much more available back in those days. Now we have, let's see, business has dropped off significantly since the heyday. However, we are excited about our anticipated revival, and we need parking to be prepared. But for now, during weekdays, I don't even open for lunch at Freddy's Monday through Friday. The weekend brunch, of course, is wildly popular, and I thank you all for those who visit us on the weekends. If the space next door to Freddy's, the little Thai restaurant, were to become available, and I look to expand my business, I would need a new CO for 35 spaces in total. I am currently grandfathered in with only 5 spaces for Freddy's, which is far less than I would need to reopen Freddy's as it is today without the possible expansion. I am not located on a Pappas property, and there's no available parking for me. In order to accomplish this, I would need 35 parking spaces to get a new CO. I have no answer to my dilemma other than ask you, the county, to, 1, change the zoning ordinance so that you're not asking us, the merchants, for spaces that do not exist, and 2, to please increase the existing parking spaces that are available today to support the merchants on 23rd Street. There seems to be a trend. A lot of people talk about Uber and scooters and bicycles and no big need for parking. But if that's the case, then I think we should also examine the county's certificate of occupation requirements. If we don't need the parking, then why do we have to have so many parking spaces? Freddy's draws patrons from the broader tri-state area, including West Virginia, and I'd say even Pennsylvania, and the Northern Virginia, Maryland suburbs that do not have adequate public transportation. They can't bike here or ride scooters to visit Freddy's. I stood on that surface parking lot with Jay Fassett and Les Garrison some 35 years ago, and somebody from the county promised us that if anyone were to ever build on that lot, they would have to provide parking for the 23rd Street restaurant row. That, over the years, has sort of got pushed to the side, and it's still in the verbiage in there, so I'd like to bring it up to the surface. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Lutz.
And our next speaker is Georgia Papadopoulos.
Hi, I am Georgia Papadopoulos. I am a principal and the Director of Business Development for the Pappas Trust. I understand things have changed tonight. So I was gonna come in and ask for an extension so that we could do an economic and holistic analysis to see what the impact of the Crystal Houses development would be on our community. But I understand that Building 5 is now leaving the control of the applicant and entering the control of Arlington County. Arlington County brought to us art space. So I am here tonight, forget what I was prepared to say, asking you to please consider putting art space inside this building. It would work so beautifully with our creative, unique, culturally authentic environment, which is very rare, increasingly rare, and at risk. So the community that would reside in Building 5 would also be able to support the merchants through their creativity, of 23rd Street. I understand that Roseland, citing economic difficulties, that's a paraphrase, did not design the building, did not intend to build it to the maximum use number. So if you would consider lifting the building by a floor so that the bottom floor is where the artists present their craft, then they could live in the units above. And artists are a community that offer creativity, spark life to the rest of the community. It's something the Amazon Amazon nights. Love, we have a doggy beer garden that just thrills them to no end. What they don't want is national brands. So this would be a very unique, thriving community of artists that are actually working, producing, and performing while benefiting from the affordable housing program that you would offer. It would work beautifully within our community. Thank you.
Our next speaker is William Bain Jr.
My name's William Bain Jr. I want to thank everybody here tonight. Obviously, there's big changes. Walsh Cluj, Roseland, thank you. The county, whoever did this in the county, they did a terrific job. I think that when you do things with the Planning Commission, many of you all up here heard our issues with this that could have happened. What you all did is what we talked about. You must have given them something on the other side for them to be able to give you this. And that's what it's all about, win-win-win. And I congratulate you guys. Hey, I could come up here and say anything wrong. Great job from everybody. So I applaud you all. My speak now is going to be for a different day. Obviously, the county controls this land now. And the county needs to, what Freddie said, we've talked to the county board for 25, 30 years about this parking problem in Crystal City. And there's a parking problem. And we got to plan it now for the next phase, the Amazon phase. And thank God Amazon's coming. They threw us a lifeline. And we got to make sure that we develop this thing in the right way, provide parking for people. For what Freddie said, these restaurants are going to die if they don't have able parking. And all these restaurants, you rent spaces from the lot that's back there now, the pay lot. We rent spaces to let our people that work for us park. If that disappeared, now the county's going to have it. And I got a feeling that the county gets it because we've had many conversations with many of you all. And when we plan this, if we can keep that park in there and develop it, if it's underneath and develop whatever the county needs are, obviously it's their control, but we need to preserve 23rd Street, those restaurants, because they provide a lot of revenue to the county. In my opinion, they make a lot of money for Arlington. And there's a lot of lives that are at stake here. There's people like Freddie he's told you, he's been there 43 years. He's put a lifetime in that street. That parking disappears, he could lose a lifetime of work. And he's one of many. I'm there 31 years. And there's Georgia, Stratus. And I tell you, you all did a great job, guys. And I commend you, Georgia and Stratus and Freddie, for what you did, spending countless hours in trying to get people signed up and get people rallied around this so everybody understood. But I'm up here today to say thank you right now. Thank you to everybody involved. Wonderful job. If it worked like this every day, Arlington would be a better place. So thank you all. You should all commend yourselves. Great job.
Thank you, Mr. Bain.
And our next speaker is Stratus Voltis.
Good evening. I got to take my jacket off. We had these T-shirts. Let everyone know what the problem was. And they say support parking for 23rd Street, support parking for local business. And we put up a tremendous fight. And I think a little background will be helpful. We thank the county for what they've done. A little background will be helpful on what the problem was. 23rd Street is a major community asset. I became trustee of 23rd Street, essentially most of it, because when Mr. Pappas died, he said, take care of this. Don't let it get destroyed. Sorry. So be passionate. We're going to have, this would have been a total disruption. Against the sector plan, the businesses, everything we're supposed to save. I don't know why I'm getting emotional. It's a destination location. Merchants who furnish lunch have parking. Merchants who don't have parking do not furnish lunch. Athena Palace, the sports bar has some parking. They can have a lunch hour. The others lost their lunch hour. Let me give you the example of Los Tios Restaurant. Back in 2018, we merged two restaurants that were struggling. We merged them into one. And we had to get new plans submitted to put the two restaurants together as Los Tios Restaurant. We went through, got the plans approved, and then time came for a certificate of occupancy. And everything was almost built out. They said, uh-oh, stop here. You need 17 parking spaces. Where are we going to find 17 parking spaces? I said, you need 17 parking spaces. And finally, we got a gentleman by the name of Mudo Mubar. A reviewer said, you need 17 parking spaces, but voila, under variance U3818-71-1 and U2869-95-5, 17 spaces exist on that parking lot in the back. So we tied into that parking lot. He said, you got 17 spaces, now you can open up. Well, the same restaurant now has asked us for an option for next door. I'm sorry, I've gone over time, and we're going to need another, we're going to need 32 spaces altogether if we have to redo an occupancy permit if we merge another restaurant into it. Where are we going to find 32 spaces? So parking is a problem. It's a problem on 23rd Street as a whole. Now that the county has it, they have said they're going to set aside 81 affordable units and a certain amount for parking. We would like that to be as a guideline, so we can work with the county to really get what we truly need at the place. So we don't want to be stuck with the 7-story building. As Georgia said, if we increase it by one level and put retail, they will need more retail parking there. So we want this to be a flexible thing so we can work our vision for preserving 23rd Street and the neighborhood. We want to be, the county has got what it's got, but we want to preserve this thing in the right way and provide sufficient parking. It's a destination location. It's not on Metro. And we can do a lot of things that can be positive, but we just don't want to be boxed into this site plan that as currently is. We need to have the freedom to maybe build more affordable units or maybe provide something else so we can go up the height that's, up to 110 feet that we're allowed to go.
Thank you very much.
Good one. Thank you.
And our final speaker is Aaron Sessions.
I'm here representing the Crystal City bid. The Crystal City Business Improvement District urges Arlington County Transportation Commission to support thoughtful and creative solutions to the parking and transportation needs of the businesses along Crystal City's 23rd Street Restaurant Row, a highly valued community asset. This is an exciting time for Crystal City as it experiences unprecedented growth and investment. With this investment comes the opportunity to ensure that existing businesses, like those on 23rd Street Restaurant Row, continue to thrive and prosper. This is especially important considering past economic shifts, particularly federal job losses in the area that resulted in the decline of daytime businesses. The bid's strategic plan recognizes 23rd Street's significance as one of the most important destinations in the area. The bid calls upon Arlington County to help identify ways to preserve and protect our existing businesses during this new wave of economic growth. While fostering the vitality of 23rd Street as a community priority, it needs to be considered in the context of our other community priorities that will be negotiated for with the new developments such as parks, affordable housing, and other transportation improvements. We encourage consideration of balancing priorities to ensure better parking and transportation outcomes for 23rd Street businesses. Getting 35 committed parking spaces is a good start, and we need to build upon that with additional measures. Curb space management is one approach for which the bid has advocated. By extending the meter hours to midnight and applying 2-hour parking, we can triple the number of parking sessions in the immediate vicinity. We encourage county staff and business owners to brainstorm additional approaches to encourage and continue success in the corridor. We ask that the Arlington Transportation Commission support a continued effort to reach creative solutions to the parking and transportation needs of the businesses along Crystal City's 23rd Street Restaurant Row. Thank you.
And that concludes our speakers for this item.
All right, great. All right, thank you so much for everybody who came out. We often do not have speakers, and we really appreciate hearing from the public, from stakeholders, and from those involved. So I know giving up an evening when you could be with your family is not anybody's idea of a good time, but I know this is important to all of you, and it's important to us, so thank you for being here. I'm going to start off with commission questions, either for the applicant or for staff. Does anybody have a question? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. New guy question. I'll start with parking questions. For the Roseland team, you said your existing parking ratio is 0.92. You've been consistently aiming around 0.7. The staff report indicates that in this land use context, going down to 0.4 would be allowable. Why that gap between what you're proposing and what staff's minimum is?
Sure. So the existing utilization for parking on site is about a 0.93. And so going down now to about a 0.69 site-wide reflects us assuming that vehicle utilization on site, that parking utilization on site is going to go down in the future. But just for economic and leasing reasons, the applicant is not comfortable going lower than that, down to that 0.4.
Is parking for residents currently charged separately, or is that rolled into rent? And what's the future scheme for that?
So my understanding is that really throughout the county, parking is charged separately, and that would be the plan going forward.
Final question. Would CH5 residents, so the 81 units or whatever it is in the affordable housing in CH5, would they be still, after it's conveyed to the county, would those residents still be able to park on the remainder of the Crystal Houses complex?
So parking is allocated in a somewhat interesting way because we're doing infill development here and had to make up for the loss of all this surface parking, much of which serve these existing buildings, which have very minimal garages. But all of the parking for CH5 was planned to be in the garage directly beneath CH5. So there's no parking that any of those residents would have had any rights to on the rest of the block. Now, there is a mixture in the rest of the garages on the block. CH3, for example, serves a lot of CH1. CH4 serves a lot of CH2. And the garage underneath these the multifamily style townhomes, also serves a little bit of CH1 and CH2. So the short answer is no one in CH5 would have any rights to parking anywhere else, but we are trying to make the most out of everything that we have and be as efficient as we can.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that Crystal Houses 5 has a total of 132 spaces, both in the garage and on the surface. So for the 81 units, I think that a 1.63 ratio is adequate at a minimum. But that's not what will happen, but we're just saying that the site plan as submitted and to be approved will have those spaces in those garages in the plan. So how we allocate them in the future in terms of public parking and housing parking for the residents there will be a future conversation, but the infrastructure for parking is already built into the site plan.
It's a good point, and it had been designed theoretically as a condo building, so there's obviously a difference in the anticipated demand for parking between a condo building and an affordable housing development.
So I'm I'm going to follow back up here because this is like somewhat new information here. How many parking spaces are shown in under CH5 for how many units?
There are 119 garage spaces, and this includes the 35 publicly metered spaces that we've been talking about until today, and then 13 surface spaces. Now, the building, as in the site plan, has 81 units and is 75 feet tall, I believe, and it can go up to 110 units, or 110 feet. And so theoretically, we could add more units. Internal modifications could also yield more units. And so we don't know what the future final number will be in that building, but the spaces, there's currently 2 levels of parking garage. And so that's, kind of what gives you this rather large number for a not as big building in terms of unit count. And so, we know this, and we are aware that these numbers will change and shift, but we're confident that we'll be able to both provide the adequate parking for the affordable units as well as to help with the public parking situation that, again, we will be studying and looking at what that right size number should be.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but that the ratio in CH5 seems much higher than 0.69. Does that mean the effective ratio once CH5 is conveyed to the county and subtracted out of the site plan is actually lower for the remaining buildings?
So the ratio in CH5 is actually 1.19. I think there may be a typo in the draft staff report. The presentation today did have the correct ratio listed, and that again took out the 35 spaces that were being reserved for public use, and so it was 96 garage spaces for the 81 units.
But does that mean that, in fact, the effective ratio for the remainder of the site plan, once CH5 is subtracted out, is in fact lower than 0.69?
Yes, it's 0.69. No, so with
that already
CH5 is
accounts for that?
0.72.
Okay,
It
thank
goes
you.
from 0.72 to 0.69.
That's what I needed.
Sorry.
Appreciate it. Commissioner Clement, you've had your hand up. Thank
Yes,
you.
well, I have some very serious concerns about this regarding the parking spaces to be allocated to the 23rd Street businesses. Right now, based on the staff report alone, I calculate that there are 161 off-street spaces, not counting the 95 in the metered parking lot. So that brings the total current availability at 256. All right, now the need, based on your staff report, is those 161 plus 109 or 270s. Okay, so right now there are not quite sufficient parking spaces for the 23rd Street businesses. Now, under this current plan, as presented to us tonight, these businesses will get 161 off-street parking plus the 35 that you're going to allocate from Crystal 5. That brings the total to 196, which means you're shy of the need by about 75 spaces. Okay, right now, 23rd Street businesses require 256 spaces, and they're going to get 270 spaces, and they're going to get something significantly less than that. Okay, now, yet, you are asking us to approve this plan predicated on a future parking study that will reallocate the spaces. I have no confidence in the planning staff that they will, in fact, take care of the needs of the 23rd Street businesses. In other words, if you are giving me a number that is so wildly unrealistic right now, what expectation do I have in the future that you will come up with a better number? I don't. So that's my question.
I'm not exactly sure what part of the staff report you're referring to, the 160 off-site spaces that the...
All right, let me read you what the statement says. This is on page 39. It says, Restaurant Row consists of 28 retail businesses, generally on north and south of 23rd Street. The majority of the structures were built, blah, blah, blah. This means that the parking requirements in the zoning ordinance of 1 space per 6 restaurant seats currently exceed that which was required when the uses were originally established. If one compares the existing off-street parking for Restaurant Row, approximately 161 spaces, not including the 95 in the lot currently owned by Roseland Residential, with the current zoning standards for parking, there is a 109 space delta. What it's saying is that in addition to the 161 spaces that it currently has, it needs 109. It's getting most of that 109 from the parking lot that it's now taking away from those businesses. Okay, and the deficit will be 75 parking spaces. Again, I don't want to argue numbers, although I do agree with Freddie and others that the amount of parking that they have will determine whether or not some of their businesses survive. So it is very important to them, but my principal concern is asking this commission to approve a plan that does not have a definite parking plan. I mean, I think that's unfair to the commission, not to mention the the 23rd Street businesses. Also, I want to add that this issue is not with the developer. I have no issue with the developer. This issue is with the planning staff. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to introduce Matt Pfeiffer from the Planning Department. He's going to address those questions.
Thank you, Jane. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Jane. So the numbers that, Commissioner, that you've cited from the staff report, what that's really pertaining to is the zoning, okay? So if you, because these uses are legally non-conforming, meaning the parking that's provided there is what was required when a lot of the structures were built in the 1930s through the 1950s, okay? The current zoning ordinance has different parking standards, but, you know, when we look at new site plan development, oftentimes we ask the board to modify parking standards based on studies. So what we're going to do here is study that and determine, you know, based on the factors that Jane already outlined, based on, you know, availability of on-street parking, current availability of off-street parking and utilization, and mode split of customers, which is, I think, probably the most important component to that study. After that study, we're going to look at what is the actual need for off-street parking. As I think Jane explained to you in pretty good detail about what Crystal House 5 contains in terms of parking, and we have the ability to use that resource to kind of plug that gap. So, you know, I understand your concerns, but I think you can't necessarily look at what the zoning ordinance requirement is to fill that gap within existing delta.
Well, I appreciate your response, and I understand it. My issue, though, my outstanding issue is that this parking study should have been done before you presented the plan. And why was it not done? I mean, why do we have to approve something, the parameters of which we do not know? I don't get it. Is there a precedent for this?
Did staff have any response to that or no?
So we do have some of the on-street parking data that was collected in April of this year. And so we have some initial utilization rates as well as the capacity and the type of on-street parking, whether it's permit parking or signed or metered. And based on that information, we can actually make some changes in the shorter term in terms of, for instance, changing some of the 12-hour parking to 2-hour time limited. Some of the suggestions that the bid representative has made today, we have already been considering. And those are changes that we are looking to do and to make to help the retailers today have more turnover and to better utilize the existing curb space. Now, the study, I think the key point that Matt mentioned is this mode split analysis. So we don't have the abilities currently to have people go to all of these businesses during their peak times to ask each customer how they got there. That would have to be done in a more formalized study. We would have to identify the entire scope, the parameters, make sure that it's done in a way that's subjective and that the data we collect is accurate. And that would likely have to be done by an outside consultant because the capacity for that kind of study is not something that we can do with the county staff that we have. That's partially why it's a future study. The other reason why it's a future study is this development that Crystal Houses 5 will be conveyed to the county was quite literally done within the last, I would say, week. And so this, maybe less than a week. So we are working, you know, to address the concerns that were raised by the 23rd Street retailers during the SPRC process and at various other meetings, as they will be able to tell you. And we looked at what can we do from a large scale in terms of helping to alleviate their concerns. And we worked obviously very hard with Roseland and Nick and his team to agree upon this conveyance of Crystal Houses 5. Now, what we do in the future will be done, of course, in close coordination with the retailers of 23rd Street. Any study we employ will have to work with the retailers and the restaurants, again, because we want to get a good idea of their customer base and the actual mode splits of the people who are coming to these businesses. So this isn't just a let's just have an intern sit at the corner and mark tallies of people walking by. I mean, this is a pretty in-depth study that we've not done at the county before to this level. I think the closest thing we've done to this type of study is getting mode splits from schools students in the Arlington public school system, Go APS or APS Go multimodal study. And so again, this is a pretty big undertaking on our part, and we're working closely with our parking team as well as economic development and other colleagues in various departments to make sure that we are addressing this in the right way. And of course, we'll include the business owners in this conversation the whole way through.
I'd also like to just very briefly, I'm sorry, add to that I think it would be premature at this time to conduct a study and determine exactly how many parking spaces we would need for public parking at this time without knowing the full extent of the county's program for this building. Right now, it's entitled with 81 units. The county, post-approval, we're going to go out and we're either going to develop it ourselves or we're going to find a development partner to build this as an affordable housing building. So we need to understand the program of what we're building here before we can come back and say, okay, here's how many spaces we need to support the program at the building, and here's how many public parking spaces we're willing to put at this site. So I think it would be premature to come back and do that.
Thank you.
So what that means is this commission will not again see when this recommendation goes forward tonight, the commission will not have an opportunity to review the final plan.
The plan will be, so what is coming before the board in December would be a plan to entitle this site with 81 units and then I think 119 spaces in the garage and a few spaces on the surface within the alley. If that is able to be developed exactly as is, then no, this would not come back to the commission. We would simply go forward, find a developer or development partner or develop it ourselves and proceed with building permits. Obviously, we would do outreach to the community and due diligence in that respect. In the more likely scenario, however, once we find the program that we need and are decided upon moving forward with, there will likely be changes to the plan, and we will come back with an amendment to that entitlement. And in that case, it would come back to all the commissions.
Thank you. Commissioner Calkins?
So I would like to see it come back because I'd like to see more affordable housing on the site. I think I'm going to reflect a little bit. This is an amazing plan. I am so excited. I think it really hits transportation needs that we want in this area. So accolades across the board. But I want to reflect on the fact that last time we were here, we were talking about Harris Teeter and that they were providing entirely too much parking. And that the fact that we're now having a conversation about possibly not providing enough parking, I think is a little bit surprising to me because the parking has stayed relatively the same over the last 40 years. Have employment trends changed in the area? Yes. So the programming of maybe parking needs in order to make your services and businesses successful has changed. But we're also expecting those employment levels that bottomed out with BRAC to come back. So hopefully a lot of the clientele base, well, yes, people will still drive, but there'll be a significant amount more, which is exactly what we said to the Ballston Harris Teeter applicants last time we were here, is that there'll be so many more people living and working in the area that they will also support these businesses as well. So we want to make sure that we right-size the parking so that it supports both the affordable housing that will be developed on the site, the businesses that are there, but also we don't want to oversize the parking either. And the approach the county is taking, I think, is very thorough, very intentional, and very collaborative with the community. And I think it's the right approach because if anything we've ever said is how do we make it so that we can provide less parking and still support businesses? And I think this is a way to make sure that we're taking the right and an intentional approach. And I applaud county staff for coming up with it.
Commissioner Lantelmi?
Just want to confirm that if as it seems likely, in order to build affordable housing on this, whoever does that, whether it's the county or a partner, will want to maximize the density on that site, which means it can go up an additional 3 stories. Would that then mean we go through a new SPRC process?
Yes. Short answer, yes.
Great. So that also then, of course, implies that this commission and the planning commission will have it back before us.
That's correct.
And we've been through this rodeo before because we had Crystal Houses 2 years ago, which was before this commission didn't get done, got modified, so we had to come back. So actually, it might be the 4th time this site will be before these commissions. I also want to say that while I very much support the study, and I think it's important that it get done really quickly, and you're doing that, so that's great. I think we need to have a broader look at the 23rd Street merchants, this little, it's a sub area of a much larger one that can almost get lost in the excitement of the changes in Crystal City and Pentagon City with the coming of Amazon. I don't want them to get lost. They have some real unusual issues that I don't think will be really fully addressed by the parking study, given how old these buildings are and because so many of them are grandfathered. What they need doesn't match what our zoning ordinance currently requires. I think a larger study, and as Georgia mentioned, a holistic study looking at what is necessary in order to nurture this area here, that we can keep it in the way that they want, and I think all of us in the county want it to be, that it will be successful given the changes that are going on in the world, that they will be able to not just survive but thrive within this larger area of what, I guess, National Harbor, whatever we're calling it now. So I will definitely want to be seeing if we can have an additional study be done, and sooner rather than later, but not in any way that would slow or stop what you're working on right now. Definitely keep doing that.
Other commission questions? Commissioner Raddick.
I'm going to shift gears for a second. Somewhere in the report, I don't remember what page, it said that there would be a 5-foot shared use connection through the site. I don't remember where that route was exactly. 5 feet seems to be a bit inadequate. It seems pretty narrow. That's my sense on that's. I don't know which. Is it the red connector? Okay. Is that the full width of the easement? Is that why it's 5 feet, or what's the?
The 5-foot easement is over the sidewalk.
Okay.
And so if you've been to the site, there's kind of a desire line to walk through this currently giant swath of parking, and it's very easy currently to walk through. And so the intent here is that in the future, if people do want to walk through, we want to make sure they walk in a safe and accessible way. And so the red highlight actually is an ADA accessible path from Fern to the center of the site, which then connects to that green public park, which there's no easement there because it's already public park. And so you can take a continuous sidewalk, with the gap, of course, in the drive aisle, but from Fern down to Eads without having to take either of the other side streets. This is intended to be used by walkers, maybe some bicyclists, families, strollers, things of that nature. We think that most cyclists who are likely heading towards the metro station will be taking 18th Street. And obviously, vehicles can still drive through the parking lot, which was also a desire that was voiced by at least 1 or 2 of the planning commissioners at SPRC. So nothing's precluding anyone from accessing the site, but the red easement area is kind of making sure that people are protected and able to legally walk on the site.
Commissioner Buck.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on that question. I think what the commissioner might have been getting to is that is going to be an important connection, not just for walkers, but for joggers, for strollers, and for bicyclists. There currently really is no way to get through the site on any kind of wheeled vehicle, and the 5-foot minimal sidewalk easement really doesn't encourage anything but conflict. I would encourage something designed to a mixed-use trail standard. It is a good connection to, I love the 20th to 19th alignment. I think that addresses a lot of the concerns to get people from East Street up to Aurora Hills. I think the 5-foot minimal width is a concern for what is going to be sort of a main publicly accessible connection.
Go ahead.
So we worked hard to get that as inviting and really to maximize the width as possible. There's a number of existing constraints. There's a swimming pool, there's an existing building, and there's a minimum width for that internal street, essentially, that the fire marshal requires. So essentially, without demolishing the pool or the existing building, we tried to maximize the width there and still provide some plantings and other things too to provide shade and whatnot. But we really feel that this is creating a desire line towards the park, and we wanted to make this as inviting as possible. And right up where it joins with Fern, we've got a little plaza there. These are some of the details you'd probably hear more at Planning Commission when we talk about open space and things like that. But you know, we tried and looked at it as much as we could.
Commissioner Lantelmi?
And Ms. Kim, on the map that you gave of the capital projects that are ongoing, is there a reason why we didn't include the Army-Navy Drive modifications? And isn't Metropolitan Park also looking to have, I think it's on 15th Street, have a separate bike lanes?
Yes, I believe Metropolitan Park has some additional infrastructure than what's shown here. I think the main point of this slide is to show that Eads itself along the southbound side has a continuous cycle track from Army and Navy to 22nd. That's kind of the intent, and showing how it's, you know, we're working together on a staff level to make sure that all of these projects are being coordinated, that cycle tracks are being constructed at, you know, street grade and not street and sidewalk and things of that nature, and to make sure that we're all, you know, working towards the same goal here of connectivity through this new corridor.
Yeah, and that's great, but those other ones feed in very nicely to it. So, you know, I like.
Yeah, we can update it for Planning
We have
Commission.
so much, I think we really should be publicizing how much we're actually doing here. So that's my only.
Yeah,
my only
we can
point
look. We
on
can
it.
definitely look to update it for the Planning Commission meeting.
Thank you.
Back to Commissioner Buck.
Apologize. Hopefully my last one. Why is the 18th Street driveway being realigned but not lining up directly with the Crystal Towers driveway?
Yeah, I mean, it's lined up. It's constrained by the building, really is what it is. And we worked with staff, with the median being removed, you know, eventually it will be full movement. And yes, we do recognize that there's a slight offset to that driveway. I don't have much more for you than that.
Design constraint.
Yeah.
So that was existing building, is what you were saying? There's an
No,
existing
the
building?
building that's the constraint is not
Newly planned
existing.
building in the way.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you. Commissioner Rich?
Just a quick bicycle infrastructure question or point.
You're not on yet. There you go.
Thank you so much. Quick bicycle infrastructure point or question. First, I love the floating bus islands. I think that's a really important improvement, and I'm very, very happy to see it. Can we go to the intersection of 18th and South Eads? Yeah, exactly. I'm just wondering if anyone has thought about sort of a protected intersection treatment. Well, having the hardscape in the middle of the intersection to protect from sharp right turns. Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks so much. Never mind.
Right, there are, right, those pink and white, that is protection, that is curbs.
Yes, the pink and white is, sorry, this plan is like overlays on overlays, so it's a little hard to read. So the pink and white is the proposed curb lines. There's multiple because we have floating islands, we have cycle tracks, we have the back of the floating island. And so it's a little hard to read, but yes, we're looking at making sure that you're protected all the way around the intersection.
Awesome. All right, seeing no, oh, nope, Commissioner Clement.
Well, I'm concerned, I want to verify that only in the last week you have come to an agreement or some kind of a decision regarding the disposition of Crystal House 5. Is that correct?
It's since the SPRC 4 meeting, which was held. Matt can.
We've been working on it for a few weeks, but that's generally correct.
Because my concern is this is premature. I mean, you're asking us to make a decision about something that you arrived at without having thought through all the parameters. And I think that's I personally consider that an imposition because I don't want to oppose, I don't want to be oppositional. On the other hand, I have genuine concerns about the businesses on 23rd Street and how this very recent decision is going to impact them. And I feel that this is premature. I mean, if it took another week, was there any particular reason why this could not have waited another month until you resolved at least some of the outstanding issues? What was the reason for presenting this now, given the very recent nature of a major aspect of this development?
So I think we wanted to make sure that we waited to bring this forward to the community until we kind of had all of the I's dotted and T's crossed and everything. And so that's what we're doing tonight. As far as some of your specific concerns, I think we deliberately, as I mentioned earlier, I think we deliberately don't want to come forward with a number of public parking spaces until we know what the program of the building is. We have a condition in there that say it's going to be a minimum of 35 spaces, which is what the previous arrangement that we had worked out with the developer was going to be. Now, once again, when this gets farther towards development between the county and whoever our development partner is, if we have one, and after the results of the study that we conduct, we'll be able to come back and right size and look at what is the actual number of public parking spaces that are needed at this site. But again, it would be premature to do that at this time.
All right, I just want to jump in and say I want to agree with Mr. Bain in saying good job, everybody. I think this project is great. I think it is evolved in a very positive way over a very large number of SPRC meetings. I think conveying Crystal House 5 to the county is exactly the kind of outside-the-box thinking and creative problem solving that we need to see more of. I 100% support the county's approach of study first and then decide on an appropriate parking number, because as I think the bid very appropriately said, we need to balance parking with all of our community priorities. And every parking space that gets built is additional construction expense, which means additional taxpayer support, which could be building more affordable units or could be putting additional county services in that building or whatever program that building ends up with. So I agree with all of that. I also will 100% agree with Mr. Lutz that part of this issue is not that we don't have enough parking, it's that our zoning ordinance says that the businesses need more parking than maybe they actually do. I think it's a combination of both. And so I think I'm agreeing with Commissioner Lantelmi to some extent that we need kind of a broader study that potentially looks at the zoning ordinance and says, hey, we've come up with, policies and plans around when is it appropriate for residential buildings to build less parking, when is it appropriate for office buildings to build less parking, and we need to be saying when is it appropriate and how do we, what kind of structure might we need around a policy that says when do businesses need less parking for their certificate of occupancy. I also want to glam on to the bid's encouragement that we really need to be looking at curb space management here, that the extending meter hours to 8 was a positive step, but it still means somebody who lives in a nearby building and doesn't want to pay for parking in their building can come home, park at 601, pay for 2 hours of metered parking. I think that's about $2.50 at this point, and hold on to that space for the entire evening and all through the night, and then leave for work the next morning. And that is a parking space that could have been 3 diners at one of the 23rd Street restaurants. So extending meter hours, looking at how long those meters allow you to park at them. And something that came up at SPRC is, honestly, there's not a lot of bike parking in the 23rd Street area. There's not a lot of good places to put scooters where they're not impeding people's walking. I think we definitely need to be looking across the gamut and how we can encourage people to come and have a great experience getting to Restaurant Row. And part of that is improving 23rd Street's intersection with Route 1, which right now is not something anybody crosses unless they have a really, really, really good reason to do so. Do other commissioners have thoughts or any additional questions that jump to mind? Does anybody want to take a stab at a motion? Or are we just going to make me do it like we always do?
Always.
All right. I move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the county board adopt the attached ordinance to approve a minor site plan amendment to Site Plan 13 to remove the site area from SP 13, subject to all previously approved conditions, and adopt the attached ordinance to approve a new site plan for 4 new multifamily buildings and 3 sticks of townhouse-style multifamily units totaling 819 units with modification of zoning ordinance standards for residential parking ratio, above-grade surface parking, and above-grade structured parking, and all other modifications necessary to achieve the proposed development plan, subject to conditions of the staff report as outlined in our draft board report dated November 22nd, 2019.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion of the motion? Or does anybody, Commissioner Bros? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
It was already seconded. I got some. Thank you. Or amendments to that motion as proposed? All right, all those in favor? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Opposed? 1. Abstentions? 1. All right. So that passes, and we are done. Thank you very much. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Best.
The next item is item number 3. This is the Met Park 6, 7, and 8 site plan. This is a site plan action. It is broken down into 2 parts. Part A is an MTP amendment, and second is the site plan action. With that, I'll turn it over to the applicant for an overview.
Good evening. Hello, my name is Joe Chapman. I'm the Amazon Director of Real Estate and Facilities for Arlington. With me tonight, I have Brian Earl with ZGF, who's leading the design of our new buildings at Met Park, and Dan Van Pelt of Grove Slade, our traffic engineer. First off, I just want to thank you for inviting us here tonight. We've had a wonderful experience getting to know and meet with all the different community groups in Arlington, and you've made us feel welcome in our new home. Since we first met you in September, we have made steady progress with the community and the county staff on the Met Park site plan. We have completed our SPRC review, conducted a walking tour of the site, and presented numerous county commissions, including the E2C2 Parks and Recreation and Disability Advisory Commissions. We will be presenting the presenting to the Planning Commission and Housing Commission the first week in December, and the County Board in mid-December. We have appreciated the opportunity to engage with a wide range of community stakeholders and value all the time your citizen volunteers have committed to review and betterment of our project. We started our design process by studying the existing planning on the site and Arlington's overarching planning principles. From the beginning, we found strong alignment with our own values and created a set of precepts that we gave to the design team to use as guideposts and inspiration for our design. These precepts have informed our designs, and some key areas of alignment we'll share include plans to complete Met Park and expand on it with an increase in new public open space, connecting the street grid, tapering building heights, adding on-site daycare, adding varied ground floor retail, consolidating and minimizing locations with loading, for loading and parking, offering facilities for bikes and other non-vehicle modes of transportation, and pursuing highly sustainable design practices. Thank you for your continued engagement on the Met Park site plan review process and for your time here tonight. Now I'll turn it over to Brian Earl, our lead architect, to give you a closer look at the project and the design details. Thank you.
Joe, thank you for that introduction. Metropolitan Park is the second of 3 stages of development for Amazon's proposed headquarters here in Arlington. Phase 1 began earlier this year with occupancy of leased space in Crystal City that will eventually total over 500,000 square feet. Met Park, shown in the dark blue in the middle of this image, as well as Penn Place just to the north of it, when completed are the second and third stages and will consist of approximately 4.2 million square feet of new ground-up development in Pentagon City. The ability to have a concentrated location that can accommodate 25,000 employees in an easily walkable environment between the buildings was of critical importance of their decision to locate here. This neighborhood is well served by a variety of transit options, as you all are very aware, including 3 metro stations, a VRE station, numerous bus lines, and a bike and pedestrian network that is already established and will be further enhanced by this project. Metropolitan Park itself was originally planned in the early 2000s as a mixed-use, transit-oriented development on the eastern edge of Pentagon City. And it sits at a critical juncture, a linking point between Pentagon City to the west and Crystal City to the east. And when completed, and particularly this last 3 phases that we're going to talk about here tonight, will help stitch those 2 neighborhoods together in a very important way. It was envisioned as 8 buildings surrounding a central green with the highest densities culminating to the east, including the Bartlett, which exists today, and the 3 phases that we're here to talk about, phases 6, 7, and 8. Today, which are occupied by a 1-story warehouse and surface parking, and are broken up along its perimeter by numerous curb cuts. It's a classicist urban high-rise plan with towers arranged around that central green, and in this way, those towers frame that central space. When we started this process, we really looked at, what is this plan doing well? And it's doing a lot of things well, but also what are the opportunities for improvement? Some things that it's doing at a really fantastic job is creating a nice, scaled, walkable street fronted by retail complete streets and a network of open spaces of a variety of scales for pedestrians and for the neighbors to partake in. Over time, it's gotten a little moved away from that plan. You can see here in the middle what's currently approved or what was approved when we started. And so we looked at this and said, how can we improve it? Well, the first thing we did is we took and we realigned the towers to frame that green. We moved them away to preserve light and air to the central park, as well as took what were private open spaces in the center of Met 7, 8, and Met 6, and pushed them out to perimeter to expand the park. The other thing we noticed was that, and if you've ever walked this site, I'm sure you've seen this, that you can't walk in and get to that park without walking past a loading dock or a garage ramp. And a lot of that's a product of how hard they worked to create active uses on all the perimeters and facing the park. But we took advantage of the fact that we were combining Met 7 and 8 into a single building to co-locate loading docks and open up 14th Street as a new entrance from the east side of the park, free of all of that. This is an overview looking down on the site. In total, there's about 2.1 million square feet of development, 2 million of which is office and 69,000 square feet of which is retail. That's 3 times what was called for in the original guidelines. And it's really been enabled by the mix of uses that we're introducing to the neighborhood. The two buildings are a height of 22 stories and 329 foot 6 inches. That's to the top of the penthouses. And we'll be providing about 2,000 parking spaces, 1,919 that are reserved for office and 64 for retail. Dan will go much more into detail about those ratios, in addition to over 620 bicycle parking spaces and a plethora of new open space. This is a ground floor plan. I've turned it on you, so north is now to your right. The Bartlett, or the building with the Whole Foods, is in the bottom right corner. Met 6 in the middle, and Met 7 and 8 on the left. And really what I want to emphasize here is the way the planning of these buildings was built with the pedestrian in mind. You can see here we've co-located the loading docks. They're facing South Elm Street for Met 7, 8, and facing 13th Street for Met 6. And those are opposite directly of existing loading docks and garages for the Gramercy and the Bartlett. That frees up the rest of the ground floor for pedestrian-oriented uses. Fronting the park, we have our building lobbies, as well as a daycare, which will serve the community. And those lobbies have really been, we've taken the bulk of the lobbies and we've pushed it up to the second floor, freeing up other area on the ground floor for ground floor bike rooms and for a plethora of retail, as we mentioned earlier. Want to highlight for you guys two important streets as a part of this project. 15th Street South and E Street, which are both primary arterials in the county. This is a section through 15th Street, which consists of 2 travel lanes in each direction, divided by a median, as well as protected bike lanes on both sides. This is our ultimate proposed condition, and we're going to talk a lot more about those bike lanes a little bit later here. South E Street is a similar configuration, except with 1 travel lane in each direction, along with parking on either side and a central turn lane, so there's no median. Again, has protected bike lanes. And what is a very wide sidewalk along East Street, which is here on the right of your page. This is a section looking south. And part of the reason for that is a very large storm drain that services all of South Arlington underneath that sidewalk. We've tried to take advantage of that and use it to create a really great space. This is an outline of the open space being provided by the project. It's really divided into 2 parts. There's a linear park along the bottom of this page. It's a continuation of the planning of the Bartlett and extending that linear park all along the frontage of Eads Street. In addition, here you can see the new park extension, as well as 2 new open spaces proposed on Met 6 and 7, 8 shown in green. What I want to emphasize here is everything shown in pink is part of a master plan that will kick off early next year. So not only plan for the new open space on these blocks, but a complete redevelopment of the park, which the applicant, Amazon, has committed to funding. So everything in that pink space will be redeveloped, and we're looking forward to engaging all of you and talking more about that soon. And as part of that, we've brought on James Corner Field Operations. You may know them from their work on the High Line in New York, a real preeminent thinker about great urban space to help us realize the potential of that space. One element of that I want to emphasize, and you see it here in yellow highlighted, is 14th Street and East Elm Street. We've proposed those as what the county would call a flush curb environment. So we've taken and we've pulled the street level up flush with the sidewalks to create a continuous space. So the street section here shows a building zone on the right, a 10-foot clear sidewalk, and then between the tree pits, the curbs are the same. The street is the same height as the sidewalk to allow smoother pedestrian flow across this space and allow it to be used for other street events when appropriate, but during typical business hours, open for traffic. And here are some precedents showing similar streets throughout this area. What's really important as we develop these streets is that we clearly define where cars should be and where people should be, but then allow the flexibility for adapted uses. So talking about things like the tree pits providing a raised planter protection for pedestrians, which you see in the top left, as well as trench drains and detectable warning strips to help pedestrians to know when they're in the street and when they're not, providing high contrast between the sidewalks from a material standpoint and the vehicular right-of-way. A great example of that is Mosaic, which is up on the top right here, out in Fairfax, as well as at the Wharf, which several of these pictures are from. So also wanted to give you guys an update on sustainability. When we first filed our plans, our buildings were designed to meet LEED Gold. That has always been a minimum target, and we're really aiming much higher. In the past few months, we've advanced this design and focusing primarily on pursuing energy and water efficiency, carbon reduction, as well as indoor environmental enhancements, all of which align very well with Amazon's recent climate pledge, where they've promised to be net zero by 2040, 10 years ahead of the county's own net zero goals, as well as the Paris Climate Accords. As part of these commitments, Met Park will achieve a minimum of 20% energy savings below the ASHRAE baseline, 50% water savings below building code, 75% carbon emissions reductions in operations, and as part of the goal to be 100% renewable energy by 2030, we are working to secure net new non-carbon renewable energy for the campus by 2030. When we take all that together, we now sit at 81 lead points with another 11 alternates, and so can comfortably say that we will achieve platinum for this project under LEED version 4, the latest version of LEED. With that, I want to take you guys a step back and walk you around the site so you can get a sense of what the pedestrians are going to experience as they see it. So this is an image of the southeast corner, the 15th and Eads, that critical stitching point between Crystal City and Pentagon City. These buildings, just as this neighborhood, this site sits at a critical stitching point, really we look at the architecture the same way. So the base and the foundation of these buildings is harkening back to the fact that this neighborhood was originally a brick and terracotta manufacturing site, and also recognizing the brick and the masonry of the existing buildings in Met Park. It's proposed as a terracotta cradle of a dark charcoal, and then inserted into that as a more glassy element, acknowledging that we have a new player in the neighborhood, a new neighbor in Amazon. That tower is a little bit more exuberant and has a series of glass fins and metal fins that both play nicely in the light and create a little bit of color, building off of a lot of things that are already going on in Crystal City, but also providing shade and glare control so that occupants are less likely to lower their blinds and don't need to rely so much on electrical light. Also provide great views of the outside. Also, another to build on that is the fact that the building will have operable windows for the occupants, allow them to engage in the environment. And I'm going to move down to street level, which you guys are probably most focused on, starting what is in the bottom left of this corner, the corner of South Elm Street and, of 15th Street and South Elm. So at the corner of 15th and South Elm, you can see how the building tapers down from 22 to 14 to 3 stories. That 3-story expression there is about 50 feet tall, and it's the same height as the buildings across the street. That's something we worked really hard on, is to create relationships and setbacks to complement the neighborhood. In the foreground there, you see a glassy box glowing a little bit. That's a 700-person meeting center that's proposed for daytime use by Amazon, but they're similar to what they've done in Seattle. They've committed to provide it to county and other users after hours when not in use. So great. I know we had trouble finding a place to meet in Crystal City, and hopefully in a few years this will be the place where we can do that. Moving down, as we go down 15th Street, we're going to come back to that critical stitching corner. You get a better sense of the detailing here of that corner, the rich terracotta interlaced with wood and copper elements. You can also start to see the brightness of the fins beyond. And really what I want to show you here as we move down East Street is the breadth of this incredibly wide streetscape. We have an unusual experience here. We're creating a great retail environment for local retailers all along this street with a series of elements that break down the massing there and canopies that create a pedestrian scale. But it's a one-sided experience for retailers, which is not ideal. And so we've really focused at Linear Park on this idea of creating a two-sided environment, this series of outdoor landscaped rooms opposite on the other side of the sidewalk, which here is quite broad at 12 feet. And just to the right, you can see that protected cycle track, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. This is moving up to 14th Street and that new gateway here. You can see that flush curb condition just appearing there. It starts out at the corner with a traditional street intersection. Very important to separate pedestrians and bikes and cars here with the curb line, but then transition up to a flush curb environment. The massing of the building step back to allow and welcome people in. And then here is a view coming through that, looking back at the lobbies, which are a pair of warm pavilions with deep overhangs, provide shade on those hot summer days. You're standing in that new park extension and looking out over that curbless street environment. And lastly, this is a view moving farther into the plaza, looking up at Building 6. What I want to emphasize here for all of you is that the tree line on the left of this image, that's the edge of the existing park today. Everything to the right is that new open space, over an acre that we're adding here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan Van Pelt from Grove Slade to walk you through the planning, the transportation planning of the project.
All right, good evening. I'm Dan Van Pelt with Grove Slade. Nice to be with you again this evening. The location of the HQ2 site in Pentagon City was chosen in part due to the many multimodal amenities that are already available. think you all are probably pretty familiar with them at this point, but the site is well situated to this type of use because of the proximity to the 2 metro stations, the VRE station, numerous bus routes, bike and pedestrian network, as Brian said, is already established and will be further enhanced with this project. There are 16 bus stops within a quarter mile of the site, serving 18 regional and local routes. 3 of the stops are going to be upgraded as part of this project. A number of bike facilities already exist around the site, including the buffered bike lanes on Eads, bike lanes on Hayes and 18th and Crystal Drive, and in close proximity, there is the Mount Vernon and 4 Mile Run regional trails. And again, the bike infrastructure here will be upgraded with this project, and we'll talk about that a little more in detail in a moment. The multimodal transportation assessment that was conducted for this project included an extensive study area from Army-Navy at the 395 hot lane ramps at Eads down to the north and then down to 18th Street in the south. There was a total of 31 intersections, included the new streets that would be created by the project. So you can see those study area intersections are there on the right in this slide. Analysis factors that were included in the study included improved development near the site, other planned roadway improvements. We took into account the Route 1 to grade project that will bring 15th Street and 18th Street to grade at those locations. The multimodal aspects of the site are very important to the project, and the mode split assumptions reflect this. The majority of the site trips will be via non-auto modes, as indicated in the mode splits that you can see here on the slide. There'll be 3 new traffic signals proposed as part of the project. The specifics of the signal installations at each of these locations is still in discussion with staff for the final designs there. The signals at 13th and Eads and at 15th and Elm will help serve the vehicular flow to and from the garage access points, and will also provide opportunities for signalized pedestrian crossings. The proposed signal at 14th and Eads will provide pedestrian crossings at this location, where there's expected to be pedestrian crossings crossing multiple lanes of traffic. There will also be upgrades to the signal at 15th and Eads associated with phasing and geometric changes at this location. Access to the parking garage is provided from 2 points, one on 13th Street and one on Elm, and you can see those are shown by the heavy arrows here at the 2 buildings on the slide. The underground garage will be connected and will serve both buildings. The office parking ratio parking is provided a ratio of 1 per 1,100. This is consistent with the reduced parking policy for office buildings, and it's one of the lowest in the county. This is approximately 1,919 spaces. With 12,500 employees at this location, this equates to a ratio of about 1 space per 6.5 employees. Retail parking is also provided in the garage at a ratio of 1 per 1,100, and this is approximately 64 spaces. 5% of the spaces have been reserved for fuel-efficient vehicles, and 2% have been reserved for electric vehicle charging stations. Building 6 includes 3 loading berths. One of these will accommodate a 40-foot tractor trailer, and building 7 and 8 also has 4 loading berths. One of those will also accommodate a 40-foot tractor trailer, and this exceeds the county standard requirements. Switching to TDM, Amazon employees, current and future, receive a monthly commuter benefit to allow them to take advantage of the area's public transportation system. This benefit is intended to cover 100% of the average transit commute cost within the region. Amazon also encourages carpooling through its van pool program. Benefits include free parking and reserved parking spaces located in convenient locations within the garage. Amazon will charge for parking. The amount has not been determined yet, but the rate will be set such that employees who drive alone to work will have the highest out-of-pocket commuting costs. While employees will likely pay for parking on a monthly basis, Amazon currently uses tracking to reimburse employees for each day that they don't drive to encourage alternate modes of transportation on the days that they don't need a car. Bicycle storage and shower locker facilities are located on the ground floor, and they will the county standards. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Amazon will provide annual contributions to Arlington Commuter Services and will work with Arlington Transportation Partners as required by the site plan conditions. Switching to curbside management, TNCs, Transportation Network Companies, Uber and Lyft. The pickup drop-off for those is proposed along South Eads near the intersection with 14th Street. You can see those are shown in pink. Daycare and office drop-off will be along East Elm Street. That's also shown in pink. On-street parking will be provided on South Eads and 15th Streets and East Elm. Those are shown in blue on the slide. The far side bus stops proposed on South Eads Street at 13th and at 15th. Those are shown in yellow. And the bus stop on 15th has been moved to the far side of Eads Street. Next slide. Pedestrian circulation will extend around both buildings on the site. This includes widened sidewalks on 15th and on Eads Street, and new sidewalks on 13th and South Elm Streets. 14th and Elm Streets are being extended through the site and are being designed with flush curbs, as Brian showed you and described earlier. This will allow pedestrian flow between the two building lobbies, the plazas, and the park that are accessed from 14th Street between Elm and Eads. The building lobbies and a daycare are proposed to activate the building frontages along the park. And by locating the bulk of the lobby functions on the second floor, the project is able to maximize the amount of retail along 15th and Eads to enhance the pedestrian experience. Given the importance of bicycle trips to the site, bicycle circulation is expected to occur along every roadway surrounding the proposed buildings. Bike parking is being provided at grade with dedicated bike entrances into each building. Bike storage facilities will exceed the county standard site plan requirements. Long-term bike parking, there are 346 spaces are required, and we're proposing 500 long-term spaces. Proposed short-term bike parking will meet county standards with 120 short-term spaces. Showers and lockers will also be provided, and those numbers are shown here on the slide. And lastly, we for somehow neglected to include this on the slide, but they are proposing a capital bike share station, a new station that will be located at the corner of 15th and Eads. So as part of the project, the team is working with staff to develop plans for the protected bike lane along South Eads frontage. This bike lane will extend the entire length of Met Park, including in front of the Bartlett 4-5. So you can see that in the plan here at the top of the slide. This bike lane is currently striped today, has a 3-foot buffer with flexi posts, and what the county calls it's a buffered bike lane. We will be replacing the striping and flexi posts with a 4-foot wide curb to protect the cyclists from cars and allow space for parkers to safely exit their vehicles without impeding the bike lane. Based on feedback we received from this commission and through the SPRC process, we've incorporated a similar protected bike lane along 15th Street. This bike lane replaces an existing unbuffered bike lane and will run from Route 1 to the east all the way to South Elm Street. It's aligned with the goals of the Master Transportation Plan and fills a critical gap in the county's bike infrastructure. So looking a little bit more here, as part of the cycle track improvements, we're going to be installing protected intersections at Eads Street along 13th, 14th, and 15th Streets. The protected intersections are designed according to NACTO, the National Association for City Transportation Officials, using their latest guidelines so as to provide a safe cycling experience for riders of all level and abilities. And it will be among the first of their kind in the county. I guess we need to beat the Crystal Houses project with their protected accommodations. On the left here, you'll see the 15th Street 15th and Eads design, and on the right gives you a bit of a bird's eye view as what those features would look like. So all told, this project will deliver over 2,800 linear feet, over half a mile of protected bike lanes in the county, and which is a critical at a critical node in the county. For reference, as of the 2018 assessment, there were only 2.9 miles of protected lanes in the bike lanes in the county. So this is a big deal, and it's a great addition to the county's protected bike lane infrastructure. And so with that, I appreciate you listening to our presentation. The team is here and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. My name is Joanne Gabor. I'm with DES. I want to thank the applicant for a very thorough and in-depth presentation. I'm potentially going to skip over a couple of my slides that just talk about what's happening. But suffice it to say, we are here for the Met Park Phases 6, 7, and 8 project as an action item to be heard presumably at the December County Board meeting. We have 4 action items that we'll be discussing tonight. The first is a Pentagon City Phase Development PDSP amendment, the Metropolitan Park Phases 6, 7, 8 site plan amendment, Metropolitan Park Phases 1, 2, and 3 site plan amendment, and an MTP amendment. As some brief background, the PDSP was approved in 1976. It is 116 acres shown in the yellow boxes here. You'll notice the donut shape, if you will, with the Costco site not included. This was split into several larger areas with the densities allocated in each individual parcel, if you will. Parcel 3 on the far right is the Metropolitan Park parcel that we will be speaking of. In 2004, with the first phase of Metropolitan Park, some design guidelines were developed. These have not been adopted by the board, but they were used as guiding documents throughout all the phases. And with each phase that comes before the board, the design guidelines are being updated. And this shows various information, and it basically stitches the decision, the area together with the central green, with access to metro, making sure that there is consistency for the streetscape and the architecture. I think we are all familiar with this site. Currently, there are some vacant one-story warehouses that were built in the 50s and some associated asphalt surface parking lots. As the applicant has mentioned, there are 2 22-story office buildings, approximately 2.152 million square feet of office and retail, about 1,900, 2,000 parking spaces, and then the construction of the associated streetscapes, streets, and open space to complete the block. The GLUP in this area and the zoning are to remain as they are. Currently, the GLUP is the Coordinated Development District and designated 3/4 high-medium residential and 1/4 medium office apartment hotel, and the zoning is CO 2.5. And again, the site is shown in the red triangle, or excuse me, red rectangle. The modifications requested are density exclusions, approximately 230,000 square feet for below-grade building services, areas open to the floor below, mechanical shafts, and below-grade storage. As mentioned, the office and retail parking ratio are both 1 to 1,100. For your reference, the current Pentagon City PDSP ratio is 1 to 650, and the office parking policy ratio adopted in 2013 is 1 to 975. The last modification is for the mechanical penthouse height. The height as proposed is 29.5 feet, and the zoning ordinance allows for only 23 feet, but it can be modified through site plan. The project layout, again, just to highlight, we have a park extension, we have 2 new street sections, and then we have streetscape improvements along all of the perimeter streets. And the basic highlights, again, is all the streets have 10-foot clear sidewalks. Eads Street does have a 12-foot clear sidewalk. Elm and 14th Street have the flush curbs. 15th and Eads, we have the protected bike lanes. And then we have the continuation of the Eads Street linear park along all of Eads that starts currently in front of the Whole Foods or the 4-5 site and then continues down to 15th Street. Again, just to summarize really quickly, we have 3 new traffic signals, 13th and Eads, 14th and Eads, 15th and Elm. There will be an entire rebuilding and reallocation of the space at the 15th and Eads intersection for the protected intersection and a new traffic signal. And then we do have the offsite improvements, which are between Eads and Route 1 on both the eastbound and westbound direction. There are going to be some changes to the median, reallocation of the current space to provide those buffered bike lanes in each direction. And then also the buffered bike lane on the south side of 15th between Eads and Elm. That will require the removal of some metered spaces to provide that. And additionally, as I forget as well, the installation of the 15 dock bike share station that will be at the southeast corner of 15th and Eads. The parking, it is 2 levels below grade. It will be accessed from either 13th or South Elm. You will be able to use either entrance to access the entire garage. Again, it's 1 to 1100. We have loading docks that exceed the zoning ordinance minimums. We also have bicycle parking and showers and lockers that do exceed the zoning ordinance and site plan minimums. The phases 1, 2, and 3 site plan amendments. Interestingly enough, with phases 1, 2, and 3, there was a site plan condition that required the dedication of all streets prior to the CO for tenant occupancy for the last phase of Met Park. Since we are at that point now, this is something that needs to be discussed. At that point, there was, the way it was written was all the streets would be dedicated. A lot of those streets do have garages under them, and that currently is not something that typically that the county wants to have. So we are currently discussing with the applicant of Met Park 1, 2, and 3 what the best option is. The options are basically, there are 2 streets shown here in blue. There's one section of 13th Street between Fern and Elm, and then Elm Street between 14th and 15th that do not have garage. So those are the only 2 streets that we would consider having dedicated to the county. But one of the potential issues then, if you have some confusing maintenance or portions of streets dedicated to the county, is something we're still discussing if it makes sense to have any dedicated. So the most dedication would be the areas in blue, and the fallback would be none of the streets in Met Park 1, 2, and 3 would be dedicated to the county. We also have an MTP amendment. So with Met Park 6, 7, and 8, currently as designed, you'll see in the middle scheme, this is what the existing Met Park guidelines showed, which is 2 buildings and then this internal street with an internal courtyard. Based on the proposed building, this street is no longer needed. It was 14th Road just east of South Elm Street. So as part of this application, there's an amendment to remove 14th Road just east of South Elm Street because it will not be constructed. With that, staff does support the project and recommends approval with the conditions as shown in the county board. And if you have any questions, I am here to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Best, I assume we do not have any speakers on this item?
That's correct, we do not.
All right. On to commissioner questions and thoughts then. Straight to the new guy. Bring it on, Mr. Buck.
I hope there's going to be a good discussion on the parking aspects. So if it pleases the chair, I'm just going to whip through a couple of detail questions that are entirely appropriate for a 1 to 5 word answer. It was expressed during SBRC that there might be a desire line for Metro pedestrians to come from the 13th and Eads intersection to sort of go diagonally across the park to get to the building lobby entrances. As part of the park design process, is the existing park sort of up for grabs to accommodate that potential pedestrian movement?
Yes, it is.
Okay. The multimodal transportation analysis, it included future conditions like the Route 1 and 18th. It didn't include what I thought was a planned county project at 15th and Clark to create a 4-way signalized intersection. Is that still a county anticipated creation?
Perhaps if you could answer your next question, I can try and look it up while
fair.
you ask.
Absolutely. Another SBRC suggestion was along the south side of 15th Street, adjacent to the existing loft residences. Curbside parking is going away. There's an existing speed issue there. Is it possible in some future phase for DES to consider peak hour restricted parking to provide both curbside access for those residents and to serve a traffic calming function?
So when you're saying, I'm sorry, could you just explain that one more time?
So the eastbound 15th Street, it's 2 lanes straight up. Curb parking is being removed to provide for the protected bike lane between Elm and Eads. Given that the volumes probably in the off-peak do not warrant 2 lanes and there's no curbside access for those residents, is it possible to consider a peak hour restricted scheme either now or at some point in the future when maybe something changes in the streetscape from Elm up to Fern?
It's something based on the current MMTA. It's not something we feel comfortable with. It is something though, because again, the county does regulate the roads. If we see that the traffic patterns change, if the volumes decrease, or just the time of day need for the 2 lanes changes over time, it's something that we can consider. And that's not true just for 15th Street. It is true for all the streets.
That's all.
Commissioner Clement.
Yes, first of all, I want to comment, this is a very well thought out design. I like the fact that it leaves very little open to an interpretation or question. It is definitive, in contrast with the last project that we reviewed. So I want to compliment whomever, the planning staff and the developer in that regards, because it makes it much easier for commission members to know what they're voting on, and that's very important.
Commissioner Boucher.
Thank you. I'd like to echo those comments. I also like how you put on the presentation who the partners are on your letterhead. I thought that's very helpful. If I understand the plan properly or correctly, there is going to be a new street created, correct? And it'll be South 13th Street.
There are going to actually be 2 new streets created, or portions of street, if you will. So 14th Street today currently exists between Fern and Elm. It will be extended from Elm all the way out to Eads. And then Elm Street will be created between 14th and Elm Street. 13th Street, which is right here, does exist today, but they will be building out that streetscape on the south side.
So it does exist today, 13th Street? Okay.
Yes.
How many numbers are on that street, or entrances, or are there any?
There's the loading dock entrance for the Whole Foods is approximately in this location. That's the only entrance. The parking garage for the Bartlett building is on this side.
Okay. There's because Arlington, how we're designed, our road system is not the easiest road system to navigate. And there is a South 13th Street. This zip code, I think, is 22202. There's also a South 13th Street that's 22204. That's just a mile away. So I'm sure the county is aware of that, but I don't think there's another South 13th Street. Of course, there's another 13th Street North.
Correct.
And I know 13th Street North and 13th Street South and 13th Street Road South and 13th Street Road North. It gets very confusing. So anyway, but that's just my comment. Thank you.
Okay. And yes, as with the larger county street system, there are definitely sections where you may see 9th Street or 10th Street, for example, portions that are not continuous across the whole county.
Commissioner Yeri.
Hello. I'd like to talk about parking. I'd like to get that ball rolling. So will Amazon be making a mitigation payment as per the office parking policy? Because they are above that, they are on that first tier, I believe, at 1 space per 1,100 square feet.
Per the parking policy, you're correct. Just for everyone's reference, the parking policy was adopted in December of 2013. This will be the first project that is anticipated to be constructed. There were 2 projects that have been approved by the board but have not been built since the policy was adopted. It is the Wendy's site, which is just over here, that was demolished, and then also 1401 Wilson, which is down by 14th Wilson and Oak Street in that general area. Based on the way the policy is written, there would be a monetary contribution per space over the, based on the reduction in spaces per the policy guidelines. In this area, the policy guidelines do say 1 to 975. There is also language in that policy that does state that essentially based on discussions with staff, if it's something that staff feels that a lower ratio is appropriate, that mitigation is essentially not required. In discussions with the applicant, we have discussed the parking a lot and what is the right number. It's something we definitely feel that a lower number is appropriate for this site. We feel there's a lot of transit, there's a lot of bus, there's a lot of bicycle infrastructure, there's a lot of sidewalks. So it's not something that we felt made sense to do the contribution, because essentially we were talking with the developer and we were encouraged them to have less parking. So penalizing, if you will, penalizing the developer for building less parking, which is essentially what staff is supportive of, and I think some of the commissioner members, if I may make that assumption, are supportive of as well, doesn't seem to be appropriate county policy. So in summary, it is not something that we are expecting a mitigation contribution, but with that flip side, I will also say that the applicant will be doing the TDM package. They will have to do the Metro cards. They are having a lot of infrastructure that they are improving in the area, including specifically the bike lanes on Eads Street, along 15th Street. We have the protected intersection. We have the offsite improvements that are being completed on 15th between Eads and Route 1. We also have the offsite improvements in front of Met Park, 4-5. We have the bike share station. So with that entire package, it's not something that we feel an additional contribution is required.
So if I may follow up then, if staff isn't seeking a mitigation contribution at this level, does that mean staff would be supportive of Amazon building or the developer building even less parking at this site?
I think
About mitigation.
I think I think hypothetical questions are sort of challenging at times because it depends on the site. It depends on a lot of the infrastructure around the area.
Given this site.
Oh, for this exact site. It's something that I think we would be open to. There's definitely, what is that right number? It's the number we're all trying to hit. The applicant's trying to hit. We want to try and hit. We want to make sure from a community perspective we hit the right number. We feel that 1 to 1,100 is a good number at this point. If it went a little lower, then the question is, how much lower do you go? So I think, in summary, if it fluctuated a little bit, I don't think that would cause us a lot of concern. But then the question would be, how do you define a little bit? Is it 2 spaces? Is it 20 spaces? Is it 200 spaces? And that would also be something, if we did reduce that, we would have to discuss with the applicant as well what they're willing to go to.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Am I correct that the county doesn't have any requirement for a number of charging stalls for cars?
So there's not a standard site plan condition that requires electric vehicle charging. There have been projects in the past that we have done specific conditions that did require that. It's been something along the lines of either requiring spaces that are enabled to do that, so all the infrastructure is in place, and then if the charging stations are necessary or wanted or desired, they are installed, to conditions where we have said thou shall have X number of spaces, but it is not a standard and is not something that is in the conditions at this time.
Is it part of the lead scoring?
I'm going to let the applicant answer that question.
Yes, the 2% that we're proposing is aligned with the lead requirement.
Okay. I'm not arguing the number. I just want to know, given the trend line is for a growing percentage of the overall fleet being electric, will it be readily expandable from the 2%?
Yes, it will. So we've been following that trend as well, and I think it's important that we design buildings and parking so that it can learn and evolve. And so we've sized our electrical service to accommodate future growth in electric vehicle parking in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Calkins.
So I think we're staying on parking for a little bit. Wow, that was louder than I expected. You guys are building 4 levels of parking, and that's a significant amount of digging. I think one of the questions you were trying to get at is whether or not the county thought maybe 3 levels of parking, less ground disturbance, less time to construct, less parking spots might be a better middle ground. 4 levels of underground parking is a significant amount of time to excavate, to do plow pillars down into the ground. That's a lot more time that the residences around the area are disturbed. I currently live across from a construction project, and while I'm aware of time and sound and things like that, and it was only a 2-level parking garage. So I do think one of the things that our commission is very advocating of is less parking. And seeing maybe one less level of parking on this site might be something that the surrounding community may or may not be in support of, especially considering the robust bike facilities that you're adding, the amount of metro access you have there, the amount of ride hailing that happens. 2,000 parking spots is a lot for 2 blocks. Whether or not it's better than some that we've seen before, I still think 2,000 is a big number to swallow as far as parking spaces go.
Commissioner Price, and then we'll go back to Commissioner Erie.
I'll put my parking opinion to the side for a second, but first to say, I want to applaud the applicant. I mean, I think this is a great plan. I mean, from a visual aspect of it, it's stunning, absolutely incredible, much improved to the area. So thank you for that. I'm very impressed with your TDM plan. I think it's really good. I think it's I think you could be a little bit more aggressive, but I like that. The one thing you did say, and if we can hold you to it, I want to hold you to it, that people who, I don't think anybody's ever said, people who drive a single occupancy vehicle are going to pay more. I don't think I've heard that come in my 6 years on this commission ever has said that. So I applaud you for that. We're going to hold you to it, but we definitely applaud you to that. I have a question about the TNC pickup and drop off location. I hear that so often that developers want to, they want to recommend that, or they're going to make sure that between this street and this street, you're going to have TNC pickup and drop off. That's the same street as the protected bike lane, correct? So what are you going to do to enforce that A, that's going to be the location, and B, that TNCs aren't blocking the protected bike lane in any other locations where they can?
So as the applicant noted on their slide, they do have some areas shown along East Street and then East Elm for proposed parking and the proposed allocation. Because this is county right-of-way, ultimately the county does regulate the type of parking, if it's metered parking, if it's pickup and drop-off, if it's loading. So based on when the applicant submits their engineering plans, they will submit essentially what they are proposing the allocation to be. We will review the allocation, and if it's something that we agree with from the onset, that is what will be installed in terms of signage throughout the course of the site plan. And just as with any street in the county, it's something that as we see the needs change for parking in this area, if it's less loading, if it's more pickup and drop off, if it's less metered spaces, it's something that the county will go and change in terms of allocating those spaces. So it's something that while the applicant is showing you what their proposal is, ultimately the county will regulate it just to make sure that it's appropriate. And also with loading, the one thing I just did want to mention also is there are areas you'll see around the county that do have 30-minute loading spots. It's something that a business or an individual would be able to come in and then they can basically apply for a loading spot. It's something that we then evaluate based on the surroundings and the use to make sure it's for the right, it's the right allocation, the right balance.
So so what you're saying is that it's then going to be up to the Arlington County Police Department to then enforce the regulations that are on that street, pick up and drop off.
And I think we all know it is a
Are
challenge.
we going to? I just going to say, I mean, it's Amazon, so I mean, it sort of takes us out to another level. Are we going to be having any conversations with Lyft, any conversations with Uber about this? Because you know what, the police department has a lot to worry about these days. Any location here, the last thing I want them to have them do is enforce this. So I want to make sure that you're not just telling us something and that you're actually going to go and proactively do something about.
As Ms. Kabor mentioned, this is in the county's purview, and the county is in fact organizing that very set of sessions with Uber and Lyft.
Great.
To talk about safer pickup and drop off.
Thank you. And last point, yes, if you can reduce parking, thumbs up.
Commissioner Erie, you were waiting.
Yeah, and just to kind of fill in on my comments here, I was seeking to understand whether or not if Amazon, the developer, were to go past or lower than one space per 1,100 square feet, whether or not the county would be seeking an additional mitigation contribution on top of the infrastructure improvements that are already coming. But if the county is not looking to seek that, I would really be curious to understand why the developer isn't seeking to build less parking given that this is such a transit-rich area, and also given Amazon's goal or mission of trying to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips and turn this into a net zero building.
Since we're having this conversation, I've seen definitely in site plan review some slides from the applicant about mode split in the area and what target mode split you're looking for the building, and then kind of how that leads to parking. Do you happen to have any of those slides in your back pocket that we could walk through?
Yep, so this is the slide that we have. I don't think we have, and I'm trying to remember if we showed something different at SBRC, but what we do anticipate is that what we have here is 30% by auto. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this is the universe of all auto trips that come to the site. So this includes not just traffic that's going to and from the garage, but this is folks that are being picked up, dropped off. It's delivery vehicles. It's all vehicles that are coming to the site. When you start to cut and slice this, and it gets complicated when you get down to the weeds, but really when you look at people trips, it really comes down to a mode split of more like 25% will probably arrive by auto. And then when you think about the fact that many of those are going to be picked up and dropped off or come in different modes and not necessarily drive themselves to the garage, and there's also carpooling that's all in there. What we get to is about somewhere around about 15%, which is about what the population, the garage would accommodate. So I hope that answers your question, but that's kind of, when you start to tease it out, that's how we came up with those mode splits. And I don't know if necessarily as much as a target as this is what was assumed in the analysis, which we think was something that fits with the size of the garage.
So I'm just going to pare it back to make sure I understood what you were saying. So you would say the total number of auto trips, which includes many trips that will not involve actual parking.
Correct.
Is 30%, and that the number of auto trips that you think would actually result in vehicle parking is more like 15% of all trips coming to the site, and that 15% of all trips coming to the site is about how many can be accommodated in the parking garage as proposed.
Right.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioner Buck.
I just wanted to provide one quick data point to hopefully make the case for some sort of reduction in the parking, whether or not it does come with a mitigation or not. And that's the local parking marketplace in this area. The Fashion Center at Pentagon City, a 0.4-mile walk away, has 4,500 parking spaces now. They currently market those to monthly parkers at $120 a month. The Costco complex has about 1,200 parking spots. They market that to monthly parkers at $115 per month. Those are Tyson's prices. I would argue that if we want to achieve the mode splits that are being discussed, and if we want to keep cars off of our local network, setting the parking as low as possible in this new facility is going to help that. And it has a direct relationship to the affordable housing questions that we've all been sort of discussing tangentially. The parking study the traffic study that DES is going to be doing in the 202 area code or zip code, my understanding is a primary outcome of that is going to be seeing what the system capacity will allow in terms of more density. So every car trip that's added through this development to the local network has an impact on affordable housing. So I would certainly argue for a much lower parking number, whether or not it does come with mitigation.
Anybody else? I just want to say I would love to see a lower parking ratio in this site, but I also don't, I wouldn't be comfortable holding up the project on that account by any stretch of the imagination. So I think what I'm saying is I am supportive of a lower parking ratio. If the applicant is interested in going that direction, I would encourage staff not to require a mitigation contribution, even if they go lower. But I am comfortable at this point recommending approval to the board as the project stands. There is a lot to like here. It is a great project. It is a project that started good and got even better through site plan review. I love the protected bike lanes, the protected intersections, the transit stop improvements, the at-grade bike room entrances, the open space, the Capitol Bike Share Station, the new streets, the new safe crossings of Eads, the linear park, the Met Park planning, the off-site protected bike lane upgrades, and what is certainly, apparently, according to staff, one of the 3 lowest parking ratios we will have ever approved in Arlington County, if not the lowest. I am happy that the project is here, and I'm happy to see it move forward. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order?
Yeah, Chris,
Commissioner Bros.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I thought I wouldn't say this because I've become quite a convert to the lower parking in Arlington, but given the fact that the number of people you're going to actually have in this building and working there, the fact that you have it's such a large number, but it's such a small amount of your workforce, it's actually still impressive that you're at that level. So while I endorse definitely less parking spaces, there's already, as my colleague has pointed out, quite a lot of parking in that area already. So there's something to be thought of there. Thanks.
Commissioner Price.
Just one really last question. Is if you find that you're not utilizing all the parking that is in the building, is there a plan in place? Do you have thoughts about repurposing some of that for any other reason, or is that not been a thought?
I can't speak to any concrete plans, but I can say that the first level of the garage is planned at a slightly higher floor-to-floor. Part of that's to accommodate van parking, but would also allow it to be converted to other uses in the future.
Anyone else? All right, I move that we recommend the county board adopt the attached ordinance for a PDSP amendment, adopt the attached ordinance to approve an amendment to Site Plan 105, and adopt the attached ordinance to approve another amendment to Site Plan 105 as outlined in the county manager's recommendation in our draft board report dated December 14th, dated November 21st, 2019.
Second.
And that's been seconded. Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Opposed? 1. 10 to 1. Thank you very much. Appreciate all your time and hard work. And the commission will take a brief 5-minute break as staff gets ready for the next agenda item. All right, Mr. Best, let's get back to it.
Our next item is item 4. The staff person is running to the PC for her presentation. Greenbrier Street, Form-Based Code Amendment. And take it away, Joanne, now that she's had a drink.
My name is Joanne Gabor. I'm with DES. I am here to discuss the RTA for the Master Transportation Plan Amendment for future planned streets for Greenbrier Apartments. I'm going to talk about 5 items: site context, transportation background, changes to the form-based code and MTP, and then review the process and schedule and the recommendation. So the form-based code is actually 2 separate codes. There's a neighborhood code and there's a commercial center code. What you'll see here in the lighter color is the areas of the residential code, and then the darker hatched areas, if you will, are where the commercial centers are. The site we will be talking about is on the western end. It is here at essentially Greenbrier and Columbia Pike. So currently there are some existing 3-story garden apartments in this triangle, rhombus-shaped area, as you can see. One of the features of this site actually is there is a lot of grade change across the site. That is something that when we get to the actual proposed project, you will see has created some challenges and some opportunities for creative design. The transportation part of this, the form-based code was adopted in 2013. As part of the form-based code adoption, the MTP was amended to introduce the network of planned future streets. And these were the streets that were to be achieved through the private development project. The point of this was basically to provide additional streets, to provide more urban walkable areas, improve the circulation for pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicles, and provide additional street frontage for the projects. Currently, the 2013 form-based code has also been updated to incorporate all the planned streets reflecting any of the regulating plan map changes. At the time of the adoption, it was basically understood that detailed analysis of each site will be done as the project's redeveloped to determine, based on the engineering and the topography, what makes the most sense and what is feasible in terms of where the streets actually are located. In this area specifically, again, you will see this is Greenbrier Street as it exists today. Here is Columbia Pike. The site, again, is in approximately this location. The form-based code showed this essentially horseshoe of streets that would be used to access the site. As you can see, it's not something that provides a through connection from a vehicle standpoint. This smaller blue dash is actually an alternative street, and it is something that would be essentially a pedestrian or bicycle-only connection. So there is no vehicle connection to additional streets in the east-west direction. It just makes the loop on Greenbrier. The MTP, as shown, again, it does show this looped street. It's comprised by 9th Street South, 9th Road South, and South Florida Street. And these were all classified as the neighborhood minor streets, again, intended for basically the volume associated with the development. It wouldn't be through traffic, wouldn't have high speed, so relatively narrow travel lanes with sidewalks. The regulating plan actually does specify specific street sections throughout the form-based code area. In this section, again, with this U shape, we do have 2 yellow streets in the east-west direction and 1 blue street in the north-south direction. The blue street is a 68-foot street space section, and the yellow street is a 58-foot street space section. This is basically prescriptive that shows you exactly what should be constructed as the development comes forward. The proposed changes, as discussed, so when the regulating plan was formed, lot lines were looked at, but they were not strictly followed, if you will. And so where the current street horseshoe, if you will, is in this location, but the site boundaries are in, again, this sort of rhombus. I don't think it's a rhombus, whatever shape that is, polygon. And so what the potential project is looking to do is basically maximize their site. So they are looking to have basically, instead of a horseshoe, have this more augmented shape that has the ability to maximize their proposed property. In addition to relocating these two streets, they're looking to convert them from the street section to an alley. Again, there is an alley section specified in the form-based code. So some of the considerations when we were looking at this and deciding from a staff perspective if we felt this was something that was in the realm of possibility is because this is not additional infrastructure that creates through east-west connections. It's not something that was eliminating or impinging on that ability. Additionally, because this corner spot is essentially in the same location, the potential to have this alternative street still exists. Based on some preliminary analysis we did, it did not become any worse in terms of topography based on the original horseshoe versus this shape. So with the MTP, the proposed changes are to remove two streets. So 9th Street South, the northern of the two east-west direction streets, and then South Florida Street. So 9th Road South would remain. And just to remind everyone, alleys are not shown on the MTP, which is why these would be removed. So how have we gotten to where we are today? In July, we went to the Form-Based Code Advisory Working Group to present this. They were generally favorable to the essentially the realm of possibility of revising the street section and location. On October 15th, we went to ZOCO for the Zoning Committee of the Planning Commission with the same general response. November 25, obviously, we are here with you all for Transportation Commissions and RTA. December, it will go to the board as an RTA. Then the MTP amendment would be completed when the project comes forward. It's something, generally speaking, the applicant would like to see this RTA happen before they commence their proposal for their project. So it's not something you would see until probably summer of next year. Again, that would be based on the applicant's timeline. So in summary, So the one little caveat I will say is because the form-based code currently has sections, which is there's an alley section, then the 58-foot and the 68-foot, and a larger section, all the commissions and the advisory working group did not really desire just an alley section. The alley section is essentially 2 travel lanes, 1 lane in each direction with a 6-foot sidewalk. So what we were talking about was essentially this enhanced alley section. So it's essentially half of one of these street sections that would be against the proposed building, and then the other half would be more the alley section. And it essentially would look something along these lines. So we would have the 2 10-foot travel lanes. Again, this is just would be the U. It would just basically be serving the folks in these buildings. And then we would have a 6-foot tree pit area, a 6-foot clear sidewalk, and then the 4-foot dooryard. On the opposite side, there is a lot of grade change, as I referenced before, so there would be some sort of retaining wall most likely needed. And there was a strong desire to have some sort of buffer area. If it's treed or just planted, that's something that we still will need to figure out based on the wall design and how much area there is. So it essentially would be a 41-foot section. And so in summary, the recommendation is we recommend the county board authorize advertisement for a long host of items and recommend authorize for the MTP and then associated with the neighborhood form-based code. If you need any more information, I am here to answer it for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gabor. I think my first question is the new streets in the form-based code were in many ways designed to break up what are really super blocks. We have some really big, areas with no streets along Columbia Pike. And this certainly keeps the block broken up to some extent, but it certainly doesn't split it as evenly and into such short sections as the original plan. I have a little trouble with scale here. Do you have a sense of how long the space is between the new streets under the new alignment versus how small it was under the old alignment?
Are you essentially wondering the distance between this essentially blue location and where this gray location would be?
Yeah, like how much additional space there are people, gonna have to, walk in theory to get to a new connection that goes through this block that they wouldn't have had to walk before.
I think it was approximately 100 feet. So the form-based code does allow, without any MTP amendment, 25-foot changes. But this did exceed that 25-foot change, which is why we are here in front of you tonight.
Okay, thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to keep going. The enhanced alley cross-section seems to really only contemplate that development is going to happen on one side of that alley. Is the amount of grade change so much that we are extremely confident that if a project does come in on the other side of these alleys, there is not the opportunity for them to actually build something that activates that other side of the alley and would like require a sidewalk and be someplace people would want to be?
So I think we have a couple scenarios in this location. So again, just to remind everyone, what we're looking at is on the essentially opposite the development. It would be a wall that, as Commissioner was mentioning, would potentially inhibit any sort of essentially having two front doors, if you will. And so what we've seen is if we look at the grade change, the area that we have the largest amount of grade change is in this corner. So in this corner, I think it's sufficient, or I feel fairly confident saying that the ability to have any buildings along this face is pretty minimal, just due to the grade change. I think when you come closer to Greenbrier Street and up this area, the wall height is minimal to non-existent, so that there may potentially be the possibility of basically mirroring, if you will, the cross-section. Because it is something that we don't want to basically just build a wall, if you will, literally, and then have issues with the other development. I think, though, when we were looking at it, the other consideration we were looking at is, that's the magic question, right? Is what is this development going to look like? You're going to have a front door and a streetscape portion on Greenbrier. You're going to have something on 8th Road South. So with this limited distance, what do you end up here? And it is something that we are cognizant of, but due to the timing of development and because we are not sure when the development would go forward in this parcel, it's something we feel comfortable with is not going to degrade the area, if you will, in the long term.
Thank you. Any other commissioner questions? All right. Generally, I think I'm fine with the moving of the alignment. I think the new alley cross-section is very reasonable. My biggest concern really is that I think if development does come in on the other side of that alley, we want it to look like a real street and function like a real street and be activated. And the whole point of having a form-based code is to make this predictable and largely administratively approvable, and for all of the applicants to know what they're getting into from the outset. And leaving that, well, we'll put this new enhanced alley cross-section in here for now, but if development comes in on the other side, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Kind of flies in the face of that predictability in the form-based code, which gives me pause. I wouldn't want an applicant to come in and say well, we don't need to build a sidewalk there because the form-based code says it's this enhanced alley treatment, and that's already there,
And I think
on the other side of the lot line.
I think it's something that when the development does come in, if there's plans, it's something we'd be able to study further in terms of what are the grades on the other side, what are the opportunities. So to me, it's something that we've done a general preliminary analysis, if you will. It's not something that we feel is out of the realm of possibility, but it's something that will need to be studied when the plans come in, and we'll have a further chance to look at that.
All right. All right, I'm going to move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the County Board advertise public hearings by the Planning Commission and the County Board to consider the MTP map amendment and adoption of an amendment to the Columbia Pike Neighborhoods Form-Based Code District as outlined in our draft board report dated November 22nd, 2019. And that's been seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, that's everybody. There we go.
The next item is item number 5, the CMAQ RSTP funding process. Dan Maloff is here this evening to give you a quick presentation. Take it away, Dan.
I have a 100-slide presentation. I'm just kidding. I don't have a presentation. If you would like a visual, I suggest you look at the table on page 2 of the board report. Good evening. I am here to talk about CMAQ, just like I am every year. I am asking for the Transportation Commission to act on this, to recommend approval of the projects in the board report to the county board for its December meeting. Just a little refresher on details really quickly. CMAQ is the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. Projects have to improve air quality. It makes the program especially good for bike and TDM projects. RSTP stands for Regional Surface Transportation Program, and those monies can be used for pretty much anything. A lot of our peers in Northern Virginia use it for road projects. We tend to use it for signal projects in Arlington. The Northern Virginia Transportation Authority controls CMAQ and RSTP funding. We apply to them for this money on an annual basis on a 6-year rolling program where every year we apply for one more out year. And though I say we apply, and that is true, we do, and they approve or deny the projects, we are due a certain amount of money by formula. They divvy up the money that all the money that comes to Northern Virginia and distribute it according to population. Arlington gets $6 or $7 million a year. It tends to vary year to year based on what projects are coming in. It's not exactly an exact, precise formula. It's more of a balancing act. So we don't exactly know what we're going to get until after we get it, but we have a pretty good idea of at least the scale. Now, talk about the projects that you see in front of you. If you've been here before, it should look very familiar to you. Basically, every year we do 3 things. We ask for $7 million or thereabouts for Arlington County commuter services, expecting to get somewhere between about $5 and $6 million. This constitutes the bulk of ACCS's annual funding. ACCS, just to remind you, is one of the very most efficient things that we do. It takes about 40,000 cars per day off of Arlington streets via funding things like Mobility Lab, the commuter stores, car-free diet, employer outreach, all the TDM provisions that we pass as part of site plans. So that's one of the projects that we always ask for and anticipate asking for again this year. Second, we usually ask for somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million in traffic signal funding. 2 out of every 3 years, we use that for hardware, upgrading the fiber optic system, improving the little cabinets that are next to every traffic signal. But every 3 years, we use it for something else. This is the 3rd year. On those years, we use it to re-optimize the traffic signal system. So, traffic flows change over time as we approve things like large buildings. And that just changes the flow of intersections. So every 3 years, we want to re-optimize, re-time the traffic signals. That takes some money to do that on a countywide basis. So we are asking for that this year, $750,000 to do that. And by this year, I mean fiscal year 2026, which is what we're really talking about here. Just before I get into the 3rd project, really quickly, strategically, we're very confident that we will get those first 2 things, at least most of the dollar amounts. They can be a little bit negotiable. But we always tack on a 3rd project, basically for flexibility at the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. It's always helpful to have a sort of small construction project at the bottom of our list so that as NVTA goes through its process of putting money on projects to different jurisdictions, there's something that, if there's $250,000 left over, we're in a position to get it. But it's relatively constrained on what works for that sort of strategy. They want it to be a construction project. It's not really enough to do something large, even by bicycle standards. It's not really enough to do a trail. Since we're dealing with money that's 6 years out, It doesn't really make sense to put it on striping projects, so it doesn't work super well to use it on bike lane projects. But we do like to put it onto bike projects because this is one of the sources of money that actually can be used for bike projects, which makes us very excited. So we tend to end up with things like capital bike share equipment replacement, which is indeed what we're proposing to ask for this cycle. And that is exactly what it sounds like. It's new bikes or new station equipment for existing station locations. We do leave open the possibility of expansion, but we can't say whether or not that is actually going to happen 6 years from now, and we do know that 6 years from now there will be equipment replacement needs, so it's more likely that that's what that money would go to. Some years we ask for other things that are bike-related. You may recall last year we asked for bicycle wayfinding signs. We didn't get that last year. That was the next project on our list this year, and we debated whether it would make more sense to ask for bike share money, ask for wayfinding signs. We went the direction of bike share for two reasons. One, it's more competitive. Wayfinding signs have not done well at NVTA, whereas bike share has. And secondly, we know that by 2026, it will have been a few years since Capital Bike Share got any of this money, and they do have needs in terms of equipment replacement. So it was just time to ask for bike share again. So that is the third project, is $250,000 for Capital Bike Share equipment replacement or expansion, but probably equipment replacement. And really, that's all I have to say. I am asking for your endorsement of those three priorities to the county board, the $7 million for commuter services, $750,000 for signal optimization, and $250,000 for capital bike share. And if there are any questions, I would be very happy to take them.
Thank you for a very efficient and thorough presentation. My only question is, I cannot remember why FY24 is so much lower than every other year in the table.
That is a very good question. The reason has to do with balancing regional needs. So I told you that we get about the same amount of money every year, and that NVTA kind of bases that on population proportion within the region. But there's not a rule that says they have to do that. That's just what they like to do. And so on any given year, if there's someone like another jurisdiction in Northern Virginia asking for a lot of money that they really need that year to do some particular project that year, we might negotiate another workaround. And what happened in FY24 is that's exactly what happened. And we agreed to take more money in sooner years to offset the difference. So we get less money in FY24. We get more money in sooner years that are not all on the table. ACCS is made whole. It doesn't lose any money. They will be able to fund their operations in fiscal year 2024. It gives us a little bit of a headache because we have to do some additional accounting to, save our money. Instead of saying, wahoo, we got an extra $2 million this year, let's spend it. But we can do that. So that's really the answer. That's a very good question.
Any other questions?
Just saying for the record, I'm abstaining from this discussion and vote.
Okie dokie. All right, then I'm going to move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the county board endorse the priorities for FY26 CMAQ and RSTP funding as shown in Table 1 and adopt the resolution authorizing Arlington County's applications to NVTA for said funding as outlined in our draft board report dated November 19th, 2019. And it's been seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then Mr. Buck is sitting this one out. That's everybody. Thank you, Mr. Maliff.
Thank you.
Our next item is item number 6, other business. Most likely, our next Transportation Commission meeting will be January 9th. This is technically our December meeting. With that, also, I want to talk about the packet a little bit. The packet. The TC packet, where you're sort of getting this sort of 3 different ways. Often the staff reports are all getting emailed to you. They're also getting loaded on the website. And then we're producing this paper packet really for this evening. You're not getting that in advance. Do we want to get away from paper in 2020? And also, a lot of the things that are in the packet really come from the developer which we get those a day or two in advance. So I kind of want to have a real quick conversation as, do we have any kind of feeling one way or another how we want to proceed?
Get away from paper.
Paper. Yeah, well, the issue with sooner, when we went to this format 14, 15, 16 years ago, we established a 48-hour rule, which meant, of course, 48 hours before the meeting you would receive it. It is possible to get materials to you quick, I guess in advance of that. However, they're not going to be this complete. The site plan stuff is really the meat of your materials. And often, this week was a little bit different because this is on a Monday, and typically our meetings are on Thursday. There would be very little available on the Friday before. We get the materials Monday afternoon into Tuesday afternoon, so you have it sometime Tuesday afternoon. So I'm not saying that it isn't possible, but it's not going to be as complete as you're used to, which is the other side of the coin.
What I would like to say is, first off, I definitely want to get everything digitally. I would prefer to still get plans in paper form. I find it very hard in a meeting to read a plan digitally, and sometimes it's hard to really read it at home, depending on how it's been saved and all of the vagaries of technology. The other thing I would say is, if you're not already, I know like site plans have a tendency to be the most complicated thing that we look at and the thing that takes up the most amount of time. I would encourage you all, if time is a struggle, to go and read the last board report that was done for site plan review committee more in advance of the meeting. And it's not going to be exactly what we see here tonight, like it would not have included Crystal House 5 being given to the county, but every other transportation issue that was talked about was already hashed out at that point for the most part at SPRC, and it will highlight the things that are still seen as sticking points at site plan review. It's a really great way to get mostly up to speed on the development so that you can go and cherry pick out of the final board report the things that were sticking points and see where those landed before our meeting. Do other people have thoughts on digital versus paper? What do we need in paper, if anything? All that sort of thing.
I'm 100% in favor of going paperless. I also, and I know some people that, you all love to look at this. This is a waste of paper. It's just going to go in the garbage.
Well, that actually, the development
5 seconds.
piece
Yeah, I
is
know.
not a county production, it's a developer. It's almost like it's promoting the project.
Here's where this all going. Right here. So, I mean, for one night, not even 15 minutes, 20 minutes of perusal, all that paper wasted, that ain't worth it.
Can we tell the developers that we won't accept these?
I don't know if there's and I also wouldn't say that there's consensus on that, because I know for me, I find a lot of those drawings very helpful, especially when we're looking at them in real time in a way that even if I brought my laptop, I couldn't navigate fast enough to make sure that I was looking at the right lane widths or the right part of the site plan. I think we could maybe ask for specific things, because there's a lot of stuff in there that we probably don't care about.
But it might cost more to
just pull it out.
right.
Cherry pick it.
And I'm in a different position, because for me, it gives me a jump on the planning commission. I will get these as part of the PC package.
He takes them home.
So yeah, because I can read them ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, we used to carry these until a year or two ago. Yeah.
Anything else? All right, great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. Yeah. And Kristen, you know why we don't carry? Kristen, you know why we no longer deliver these?
I'm over.
It's when the manager called the police.
He's not the manager anymore.